21. The dead and living meet. See now the place where I have slept for these 2,000 years, said Aisha, taking the lamp from Leo's hand and holding it above her head. Its rays fell upon a little hollow in the floor, where I had seen the leaping flame, but the fire was out now. They fell upon the white form stretched there beneath its wrappings, upon its bed of stone, upon the fretted carving of the tomb, and upon another shelf of stone opposite the one on which the body lay, and separated from it by the breadth of the cave. Here, went on Aisha, laying her hand upon the rock, here have I slept night by night for all these generations, with but a cloak to cover me. It did not become me that I should lie soft when my spouse yonder, and she pointed to the rigid form, lay stiff in death. Here night by night have I slept in his cold company, till thou sayest, this thick slab, like the stairs down which we passed, has worn thin with the tossing of my form. So faithful have I been to thee even in thy space of sleep, Callicrates. And now, mine own, thou shalt see a wonderful thing. Living, thou shalt behold thyself dead. For well have I tended thee during all these years, Callicrates. Art thou prepared? We made no answer, but gazed at each other with frightened eyes. The whole scene was so dreadful and so solemn. Aisha advanced, and laid her hand upon the corner of the shroud, and once more spoke. Be not affrighted, she said. Though the thing seem wonderful to thee, all we who live have thus lived before. Nor is the very shape that holds us a stranger to the sun. Only we know it not, because memory writes no record, and earth hath gathered in the earth she lent us, for none have saved our glory from the grave. But I, by my arts and by the arts of those dead men of core which I have learned, have held thee back, O Callicrates, from the dust, that the waxen stamp of beauty on thy face should ever rest before mine eye. 'Twas a mask that memory might fill, serving to fashion out thy presence from the past, and give it strength to wander in the habitations of my thought, clad in a mummery of life that stayed my appetite with visions of dead days. Behold now, let the dead and living meet. Across the gulf of time they still are one. Time hath no power against identity, though sleep the merciful hath blotted out the tablets of our mind, and with oblivion sealed the sorrows that else would hound us from life to life, stuffing the brain with gathered griefs till it burst in the madness of uttermost despair. Still are they one, for the wrappings of our sleep shall roll away as thunderclouds before the wind. The frozen voice of the past shall melt in music like mountain snows beneath the sun, and the weeping and the laughter of the lost hours shall be heard once more most sweetly echoing up the cliffs of immeasurable time. Aye, the sleep shall roll away, and the voices shall be heard, when down the completed chain, whereof our each existence is a link, the lightning of the Spirit hath passed to work out the purpose of our being, quickening and fusing those separated days of life, and shaping them to a staff whereon we may safely lean as we wend to our appointed fate. Therefore have no fear, Callicrates, when thou living, and but lately born, shalt look upon thine own departed self, who breathed and died so long ago. I do but turn one page in thy book of being, and show thee what is writ thereon. Behold! With a sudden motion she drew the shroud from the cold form, and let the lamplight play upon it. I looked, and then shrank back terrified, since say what she might in explanation, the sight was an uncanny one, for her explanations were beyond the grasp of our finite minds, and when they were stripped from the mists of vague esoteric philosophy, and brought into conflict with the cold and horrifying fact, did not do much to break its force. For there, stretched upon the stone bier before us, robed in white and perfectly preserved, was what appeared to be the body of Leo Vinci. I stared from Leo, standing there alive, to Leo lying there dead, and could see no difference, except, perhaps, that the body on the bier looked older. Feature for feature they were the same, even down to the crop of little golden curls, which was Leo's most uncommon beauty. It even seemed to me, as I looked, that the expression on the dead man's face resembled that which I had sometimes seen upon Leo's when he was plunged into profound sleep. I can only sum up the closeness of the resemblance by saying that I never saw twins so exactly similar as that dead and living pair. I turned to see what effect was produced upon Leo by the sight of his dead self, and found it to be one of partial stupefaction. He stood for 2 or 3 minutes staring, and said nothing, and when at last he spoke it was only to ejaculate, "Cover it up and take me away." "Nay, wait, Callicrates," said Aisha, who, standing with the lamp raised above her head, flooding with its light her own rich beauty and the cold wonder of the death-clothed form upon the bier, resembled an inspired sibyl rather than a woman, as she rolled out her majestic sentences with a grandeur and a freedom of utterance which I am, alas, quite unable to reproduce. Wait, I would show thee something, that no tittle of my crime may be hidden from thee. Do thou, O Holly, open the garment on the breast of the dead Callicrates, for perchance my lord may fear to touch it himself. I obeyed with trembling hands. It seemed a desecration and an unhallowed thing to touch that sleeping image of the live man by my side. Presently his broad chest was bare, and there upon it, right over the heart, was a wound, evidently inflicted with a spear. Thou sayest Callicrates, she said. Know then that it was I who slew thee. In the place of life I gave thee death. I slew thee because of the Egyptian Amenartes, whom thou didst love, for by her wile she held thy heart, and her I could not smite as but now I smote that woman, for she was too strong for me. In my haste and bitter anger I slew thee. And now for all these days have I lamented thee, and waited for thy coming. And thou hast come, and none can stand between thee and me. And of a truth now for death I will give thee life, not life eternal, for that none can give, but life in youth that shall endure for thousands upon thousands of years, and with it pomp and power and wealth, and all things that are good and beautiful, such as have been to no man before thee, nor shall be to any man who comes after. And now one thing more, and thou shalt rest and make ready for the day of thy new birth. Thou sayest this body, which was thine own. For all these centuries it hath been my cold comfort and my companion, but now I need it no more, for I have thy living presence, and it can but serve to stir up memories of that which I would fain forget. Let it therefore go back to the dust from which I held it. Behold, I have prepared against this happy hour. And going to the other shelf or stone ledge, which she said had served her for a bed, she took from it a large vitrified double-handed vase, the mouth of which was tied up with a bladder. This she loosed, and then, having bent down and gently kissed the white forehead of the dead man, she undid the vase, and sprinkled its contents carefully over the form, taking, I observed, the greatest precautions against any drop of them touching us or herself, and then poured out what remained of the liquid upon the chest and head. Instantly a dense vapor arose, and the cave was filled with choking fumes that prevented us from seeing anything, while the deadly acid, for I presume it was some tremendous preparation of that sort, did its work. From the spot where the body lay came a fierce fizzing and cracking sound, which ceased, however, before the fumes had cleared away. At last they were all gone, except a little cloud that still hung over the corpse. In a couple of minutes more this too had vanished, and wonderful as it may seem, it is a fact that on the stone bench that had supported the mortal remains of the ancient Callicrates for so many centuries there was now nothing to be seen but a few handfuls of smoking white powder. The acid had utterly destroyed the body, and even in places eaten into the stone. Aisha stooped down, and taking a handful of this powder in her grasp, threw it into the air, saying at the same time, in a voice of calm solemnity, "Dust to dust, the past to the past, the dead to the dead. Callicrates is dead, and is born again." The ashes floated noiselessly to the rocky floor, and we stood in awed silence and watched them fall, too overcome for words. "Now leave me," she said, "and sleep if ye may. I must watch and think, for tomorrow night we go hence, and the time is long since I trod the path that we must follow." Accordingly we bowed and left her. As we passed to our own apartment I peeped into Job's sleeping place, to see how he fared, for he had gone away just before our interview with the murdered Ustane, quite prostrated by the terrors of the Haggard festivity. He was sleeping soundly, good honest fellow that he was, and I rejoiced to think that his nerves, which like those of most uneducated people, were far from strong, had been spared the closing scenes of this dreadful day. Then we entered our own chamber, and here at last poor Leo, who ever since he had looked upon that frozen image of his living self, had been in a state not far removed from stupefaction, burst out into a torrent of grief. Now that he was no longer in the presence of the dread she, his sense of the awfulness of all that had happened, and more especially of the wicked murder of Ustane, who was bound to him by ties so close, broke upon him like a storm, and lashed him into an agony of remorse and terror which was painful to witness. He cursed himself. He cursed the hour when we had first seen the writing on the sherd, which was being so mysteriously verified, and bitterly he cursed his own weakness. Aisha he dared not curse. Who dared speak evil of such a woman whose consciousness, for aught we knew, was watching us at the very moment? What am I to do, old fellow? He groaned, resting his head against my shoulder in the extremity of his grief. I let her be killed. Not that I could help that, but within 5 minutes I was kissing her murderess over her body. I am a degraded brute, but I cannot resist that. And here his voice sank. That awful sorceress. I know I shall do it again tomorrow. I know that I am in her power for always. If I never saw her again, I should never think of anybody else during all my life. I must follow her as a needle follows a magnet. I would not go away now if I could. I could not leave her, my legs would not carry me, but my mind is still clear enough, and in my mind I hate her, at least I think so. It is all so horrible, and that body. What can I make of it? It was I. I am sold into bondage, old fellow, and she will take my soul as the price of herself. Then, for the first time, I told him that I was in a but very little better position. And I am bound to say that, notwithstanding his own infatuation, he had the decency to sympathize with me. Perhaps he did not think it worth while being jealous. Realizing that he had no cause so far as the lady was concerned, I went on to suggest that we should try to run away, but we soon rejected the project as futile, and to be perfectly honest, I do not believe that either of us would really have left Aisha even if some superior power had suddenly offered to convey us from these gloomy caves and set us down in Cambridge. We could no more have left her than a moth can leave the light that destroys it. We were like confirmed opium eaters. In our moments of reason we well knew the deadly nature of our pursuit, but we certainly were not prepared to abandon its terrible delights. No man who once had seen she unveiled, and heard the music of her voice, and drunk in the bitter wisdom of her words, would willingly give up the sight for a whole sea of placid joys. How much more, then, was this likely to be so when, as in Leo's case, to put myself out of the question, this extraordinary creature declared her utter and absolute devotion, and gave what appeared to be proofs of its having lasted for some 2,000 years. No doubt she was a wicked person, and no doubt she had murdered Ustane when she stood in her path, but then she was very faithful, and by a law of nature man is apt to think but lightly of a woman's crimes, especially if that woman be beautiful, and the crime be committed for the love of him. And then, for the rest, when had such a chance ever come to a man before as that which now lay in Leo's hand? True, in uniting himself to this dread woman, he would place his life under the influence of a mysterious creature of evil tendencies. But then that would be likely enough to happen to him in any ordinary marriage. On the other hand, however, no ordinary marriage could bring him such awful beauty, for awful is the only word that can describe it, such divine devotion, such wisdom, and command over the secrets of nature, and the place and power that they must win, or lastly, the royal crown of unending youth, if indeed she could give that. No, on the whole, it is not wonderful that, though Leo was plunged in bitter shame and grief, such as any gentleman would have felt under the circumstances, he was not ready to entertain the idea of running away from his extraordinary fortune. After some months of consideration of this statement, I am bound to confess that I am not quite satisfied of its truth. It is perfectly true that Aisha committed a murder, but I shrewdly suspect that, were we endowed with the same absolute power, and if we had the same tremendous interest at stake, we would be very apt to do likewise under parallel circumstances. Also, it must be remembered that she looked on it as an execution for disobedience under a system which made the slightest disobedience punishable by death. Putting aside this question of the murder, her evil-doing resolves itself into the expression of views and the acknowledgement of motives which are contrary to our preaching if not to our practice. Now at first sight this might be fairly taken as a proof of an evil nature, but when we come to consider the great antiquity of the individual it becomes doubtful if it was anything more than the natural cynicism which arises from age and bitter experience, and the possession of extraordinary powers of observation. It is a well-known fact that very often, putting the period of boyhood out of the question, the older we grow the more cynical and hardened we get. Indeed, many of us are only saved by timely death from utter moral petrifaction if not moral corruption. No one will deny that a young man is on the average better than an old one, for he is without that experience of the order of things that in certain thoughtful dispositions can hardly fail to produce cynicism, and that disregard of acknowledged methods and established custom which we call evil. Now the oldest man upon the earth was but a babe compared to Aisha, and the wisest man upon the earth was not 1/3 as wise. And the fruit of her wisdom was this, that there was but one thing worth living for, and that was love in its highest sense, and to gain that good thing she was not prepared to stop at trifles. This is really the sum of her evil doings, and it must be remembered, on the other hand, that whatever may be thought of them, she had some virtues developed to a degree very uncommon in either sex. Constancy, for instance. L.H.H. My own opinion is that he would have been mad if he had done so. But then I confess that my statement on the matter must be accepted with qualifications. I am in love with Aisha myself to this day, and I would rather have been the object of her affection for one short week than that of any other woman in the world for a whole lifetime. And let me add that, if anybody who doubts this statement, and thinks me foolish for making it, could have seen Aisha draw her veil and flash out in beauty on his gaze, his view would exactly coincide with my own. Of course, I am speaking of any man. We never had the advantage of a lady's opinion of Aisha, but I think it quite possible that she would have regarded the queen with dislike, would have expressed her disapproval in some more or less pointed manner, and ultimately have got herself blasted. For 2 hours or more Leo and I sat with shaken nerves and frightened eyes, and talked over the miraculous events through which we were passing. It seemed like a dream or a fairy tale, instead of the solemn, sober fact. Who would have believed that the writing on the potsherd was not only true, but that we should live to verify its truth, and that we two seekers should find her who was sought, patiently awaiting our coming in the tombs of Kor? Who would have thought that in the person of Leo this mysterious woman should, as she believed, discover the being whom she awaited from century to century, and whose former earthly habitation she had till this very night preserved? But so it was. In the face of all we had seen, it was difficult for us as ordinary reasoning men any longer to doubt its truth, and therefore at last, with humble hearts and a deep sense of the impotence of human knowledge, and the insolence of its assumption that denies that to be possible which it has no experience of, we laid ourselves down to sleep, leaving our fates in the hands of that watching Providence which had thus chosen to allow us to draw the veil of human ignorance, and reveal to us for good or evil some glimpse of the possibilities of life. 22. Job has a presentiment. It was 9 o'clock on the following morning when Job, who still looked scared and frightened, came in to call me, and at the same time breathe his gratitude at finding us alive in our beds, which it appeared was more than he had expected. When I told him of the awful end of poor Ustane, he was even more grateful at our survival, and much shocked, though Ustane had been no favorite of his, or he of hers, for the matter of that. She called him pig in bastard Arabic, and he called her hussy in good English, but these amenities were forgotten in the face of the catastrophe that had overwhelmed her at the hands of her queen. "I don't want to say anything as mayn't be agreeable, sir," said Job, when he had finished exclaiming at my tale, "but it's my opinion that there she is the old gentleman himself, or perhaps his wife, if he has one, which I suppose he has, for he couldn't be so wicked all by himself. The witch of Endor was a fool to her, sir. Bless you, she would make no more of raising every gentleman in the Bible out of these here beastly tombs than I should of growing crests on an old flannel. It's a country of devils, this is, sir, and she's the master one of the lot, and if ever we get out of it, it will be more than I expect to do. I don't see no way out of it. That witch isn't likely to let a fine young man like Mr. Leo go." "Come," I said. "At any rate she saved his life." "Yes, and she'll take his soul to pay for it. She'll make him a witch, like herself. I say it's wicked to have anything to do with those sort of people. Last night, sir, I lay awake and read in my little Bible that my poor old mother gave me about what is going to happen to sorceresses and them sort, till my hair stood on end. Lord, how the old lady would stare if she saw where her Job had got to." "Yes, it's a queer country, and a queer people too, Job," I answered with a sigh, for though I am not superstitious like Job, I admit to a natural shrinking, which will not bear investigation, from the things that are above nature. "You are right, sir," he answered, "and if you won't think me very foolish, I should like to say something to you now that Mr. Leo is out of the way." Leo had got up early and gone for a stroll. "And that is that I know it is the last country as ever I shall see in this world. I had a dream last night, and I dreamed that I saw my old father with a kind of nightshirt on him, something like these folks wear when they want to be in particular full dress, and a bit of that feathery grass in his hand, which he may have gathered on the way, for I saw lots of it yesterday about 300 yards from the mouth of this beastly cave. Job," he said to me solemn-like, and yet with a kind of satisfaction shining through him. More like a Methody parson when he has sold a neighbor a marked horse for a sound one and cleared £20 by the job than anything I can think on. Job time's up, Job, but I never did expect to have to come and hunt you out in this air place, Job. Such ado as I have had to nose you up. It wasn't friendly to give your poor old father such a run, let alone that a wonderful lot of bad characters hail from this place core. Regular cautions, I suggested. Yes, sir, of course, sir, that's just what he said they was. Cautions, downright scorchers, sir, and I'm sure I don't doubt it, seeing what I know of them and their hot-potting ways, went on Job sadly. Anyway, he was sure that time was up, and went away saying that we should see more than we cared for of each other soon. And I suppose he was thinking of the fact that father and I never could hit it off together for longer nor 3 days. And I dare say that things will be similar when we meet again. Surely, I said. You don't think that you are going to die because you dreamed you saw your old father. If one dies because one dreams of one's father, what happens to a man who dreams of his mother-in-law? Ah, sir, you're laughing at me, said Job. But you see, you didn't know my old father. If it had been anybody else, my Aunt Mary, for instance, who never made much of a job, I should not have thought so much of it. But my father was that idle, which he shouldn't have been with 17 children, that he would never have put himself out to come here just to see the place. No, sir, I know that he meant business. Well, sir, I can't help it. I suppose every man must go some time or other, though it is a hard thing to die in a place like this, where Christian burial isn't to be had for its weight in gold. I've tried to be a good man, sir, and do my duty honest, and if it wasn't for the supercilious kind of way in which father carried on last night, a sort of sniffing at me as it were, as though he hadn't no opinion of my references and testimonials, I should feel easy enough in my mind. Anyway, sir, I've been a good servant to you and Mr. Leo, bless him. Why, it seems but the other day that I used to lead him about the streets with a penny whip. And if ever you get out of this place, which as father didn't allude to you, perhaps you may, I hope you will think kindly of my whitened bones, and never have anything more to do with Greek writing on flower pots, sir, if I may make so bold as to say so. Come, come, Job, I said seriously, this is all nonsense, you know. You mustn't be silly enough to go getting such ideas into your head. We've lived through some queer things, and I hope that we may go on doing so. No, sir, answered Job, in a tone of conviction that jarred on me unpleasantly. It isn't nonsense. I'm a doomed man, and I feel it, and a wonderful uncomfortable feeling it is, sir, for one can't help wondering how it's going to come about. If you are eating your dinner you think of poison, and it goes against your stomach. And if you are walking along these dark rabbit burrows you think of knives, and Lord, don't you just shiver about the back. I ain't particular, sir, provided it's sharp like that poor girl, who now that she's gone, I am sorry to have spoke hard on, though I don't approve of her morals in getting married, which I consider too quick to be decent. Still, sir, and poor Job turned a shade paler as he said it, I do hope it won't be that hot pot game. Nonsense, I broke in angrily, nonsense. Very well, sir, said Job. It isn't my place to differ from you, sir, but if you happen to be going anywhere, sir, I should be obliged if you could manage to take me with you, seeing that I shall be glad to have a friendly face to look at when the time comes, just to help one through, as it were. And now, sir, I'll be getting the breakfast. And he went, leaving me in a very uncomfortable state of mind. I was deeply attached to old Job, who was one of the best and honestest men I have ever had to do with in any class of life, and really more of a friend than a servant, and the mere idea of anything happening to him brought a lump into my throat. Beneath all his ludicrous talk I could see that he himself was quite convinced that something was going to happen, and though in most cases these convictions turn out to be utter moonshine, and this particular one especially was to be amply accounted for by the gloomy and unaccustomed surroundings in which its victim was placed, still it did more or less carry a chill to my heart, as any dread that is obviously a genuine object of belief is apt to do, however absurd the belief may be. Presently the breakfast arrived, and with it Leo, who had been taking a walk outside the cave. To clear his mind, he said, and very glad I was to see both, for they gave me a respite from my gloomy thoughts. After breakfast we went for another walk, and watched some of the Haggard sowing a plot of ground with the grain from which they make their beer. This they did in scriptural fashion. A man with a bag made of goat's hide fastened round his waist walking up and down the plot, and scattering the seed as he went. It was a positive relief to see one of these dreadful people do anything so homely and pleasant as sow a field, perhaps because it seemed to link them, as it were, with the rest of humanity. As we were returning, Bilali met us, and informed us that it was she's pleasure that we should wait upon her, and accordingly we entered her presence, not without trepidation, for Aisha was certainly an exception to the rule. Familiarity with her might and did breed passion and wonder and horror, but it certainly did not breed contempt. We were as usual shown in by the mutes, and after these had retired Aisha unveiled, and once more bade Leo embrace her, which, notwithstanding his heart-searchings of the previous night, he did with more alacrity and fervor than in strictness courtesy required. She laid her white hand on his head, and looked him fondly in the eyes. "Dost thou wonder, my Callicrates," she said, "when thou shalt call me all thine own, and when we shall of a truth be for one another and to one another? I will tell thee. First, must thou be even as I am, not immortal indeed, for that I am not, but so cased and hardened against the attacks of time that his arrows shall glance from the armor of thy vigorous life as the sunbeams glance from water. As yet I may not mate with thee, for thou and I are different, and the very brightness of my being would burn thee up, and perchance destroy thee. Thou couldst not even endure to look upon me for too long a time lest thine eyes should ache, and thy senses swim, and therefore," with a little nod, "shall I presently veil myself again." This, by the way, she did not do. "No, listen, thou shalt not be tried beyond endurance, for this very evening, an hour before the sun goes down, shall we start hence, and by tomorrow's dark, if all goes well, and the road is not lost to me, which I pray it may not be, shall we stand in the place of life, and thou shalt bathe in the fire, and come forth glorified, as no man ever was before thee, and then, Callicrates, shalt thou call me wife, and I will call thee husband." Leo muttered something in answer to this astonishing statement, I do not know what, and she laughed a little at his confusion, and went on. "And thou too, O Holly, on thee also will I confer this boon, and then of a truth shalt thou be evergreen, and this will I do, well, because thou hast pleased me, Holly, for thou art not altogether a fool, like most of the sons of men, and because though thou hast a school of philosophy as full of nonsense as those of the old days, yet hast thou not forgotten how to turn a pretty phrase about a lady's eyes." "Hello, old fellow," whispered Leo, with a return of his old cheerfulness. "Have you been paying compliments? I should never have thought it of you." "I thank thee, O Aisha," I replied, with as much dignity as I could command. "But if there be such a place as thou dost describe, and if in this strange place there may be found a fiery virtue that can hold off death when he comes to pluck us by the hand, yet would I none of it. For me, O Aisha, the world has not proved so soft a nest that I would lie in it forever. A stony-hearted mother is our earth, and stones are the bread she gives her children for their daily food, stones to eat and bitter water for their thirst, and stripes for tender nurture. Who would endure this for many lives? Who would so load up his back with memories of lost hours and loves, and of his neighbor's sorrows that he cannot lessen, and wisdom that brings not consolation? Hard is it to die, because our delicate flesh doth shrink back from the worm it will not feel, and from that unknown which the winding sheet doth curtain from our view. But harder still, to my fancy, would it be to live on, green in the leaf and fair, but dead and rotten at the core, and feel that other secret worm of recollection gnawing ever at the heart. "Bethink thee, Holly," she said, "yet doth long life and strength and beauty beyond measure mean power and all things that are dear to man." "And what, O Queen," I answered, "are those things that are dear to man? Are they not bubbles? Is not ambition but an endless ladder by which no height is ever climbed till the last unreachable rung is mounted? For height leads on to height, and there is no resting place upon them, and rung doth grow upon rung, and there is no limit to the number. Doth not wealth satiate, and become nauseous, and no longer serve to satisfy our pleasure, or to buy an hour's peace of mind? And is there any end to wisdom that we may hope to reach it? Rather, the more we learn, shall we not thereby be able only to better compass out our ignorance? Did we live 10,000 years, could we hope to solve the secrets of the suns, and of the space beyond the suns, and of the hand that hung them in the heavens? Would not our wisdom be but as a gnawing hunger calling our consciousness day by day to a knowledge of the empty craving of our souls? Would it not be but as a light in one of these great caverns, that, though bright it burn, and brighter yet, doth but the more serve to show the depths of the gloom around it? And what good thing is there beyond that we may gain by length of days? Nay, my Holly, there is love, love which makes all things beautiful, and doth breathe divinity into the very dust we tread. With love shall life roll gloriously on from year to year, like the voice of some great music that hath power to hold the hearer's heart poised on eagle's wings above the sordid shame and folly of the earth. It may be so, I answered, but if the loved one prove a broken reed to pierce us, or if the love be loved in vain, what then? Shall a man grave his sorrows upon a stone when he hath but need to write them on the water? Nay, O she, I will live my day, and grow old with my generation, and die my appointed death, and be forgotten. For I do hope for an immortality to which the little span that perchance thou canst confer will be but as a finger's length laid against the measure of the great world. And mark this, the immortality to which I look, and which my faith doth promise me, shall be free from the bonds that here must tie my spirit down. For while the flesh endures, sorrow and evil and the scorpion whips of sin must endure also. But when the flesh hath fallen from us, then shall the spirit shine forth clad in the brightness of eternal good. And for its common air shall breathe so rare an ether of most noble thoughts that the highest aspiration of our manhood, or the purest incense of a maiden's prayer, would prove too earthly gross to float therein. Thou lookest high, answered Aisha, with a little laugh, and speakest clearly as a trumpet and with no uncertain sound, and yet methinks that but now didst thou talk of that unknown, from which the winding sheet doth curtain us. But perchance, thou sayest with the eye of faith, gazing on that brightness, that is to be, through the painted glass of thy imagination. Strange are the pictures of the future that mankind can thus draw with this brush of faith and this many-colored pigment of imagination. Strange, too, that no one of them doth agree with another. I could tell thee, but there, what is the use? Why rob a fool of his bauble? Let it pass, and I pray, O Holly, that when thou dost feel old age creeping slowly toward thyself, and the confusion of senility making havoc in thy brain, thou mayest not bitterly regret that thou didst cast away the imperial boon I would have given to thee. But so it hath ever been. Man can never be content with that which his hand can pluck. If a lamp be in his reach to light him through the darkness, he must needs cast it down because it is no star. Happiness danceth ever apace before him, like the marsh fires in the swamps, and he must catch the fire, and he must hold the star. Beauty is not to him, because there are lips more honey-sweet, and wealth is not, because others can weigh him down with heavier shekels, and fame is not, because there have been greater men than he. Thyself thou saidst it, and I turn thy words against thee. Well, thou dreamest that thou shalt pluck the star. I believe it not, and I think thee a fool, my Holly, to throw away the lamp. I made no answer, for I could not, especially before Leo, tell her that since I had seen her face I knew that it would always be before my eyes, and that I had no wish to prolong an existence which must always be haunted and tortured by her memory, and by the last bitterness of unsatisfied love. But so it was, and so, alas, is it to this hour. And now, went on she, changing her tone and the subject together, tell me, my Callicrates, for as yet I know it not, how came ye to seek me here? Yesternight thou didst say that Callicrates, him whom thou sawest, was thine ancestor. How was it? Tell me, thou dost not speak over much. Thus adjured, Leo told her the wonderful story of the casket and of the potsherd that, written on by his ancestress, the Egyptian Amenartes, had been the means of guiding us to her. Aisha listened intently, and when he had finished, spoke to me. Did I not tell thee one day, when we did talk of good and evil, O Holly, it was when my beloved lay so ill, that out of good came evil, and out of evil good, that they who sowed knew not what the crop should be, nor he who struck where the blow should fall? See now, this Egyptian Amenartes, this royal child of the Nile who hated me, and whom even now I hate, for in a way she did prevail against me. See now, she herself hath been the very means to bring her lover to mine arms. For her sake I slew him, and now behold, through her he hath come back to me. She would have done me evil, and sowed her seeds that I might reap tares. And behold, she hath given me more than all the world can give. And there is a strange square for thee to fit into thy circle of good and evil, O Holly. And so, she went on after a pause, and so she bade her son destroy me if he might, because I slew his father. And thou, my Callicrates, art the father, and in a sense thou art likewise the sun. And wouldst thou avenge thy wrong, and the wrong of that far-off mother of thine, upon me, O Callicrates? See, and she slid to her knees, and drew the white corsage still farther down her ivory bosom. See, here beats my heart, and there by thy side is a knife, heavy and long, and sharp, the very knife to slay an erring woman with. Take it now, and be avenged. Strike, and strike home. So shalt thou be satisfied, Callicrates, and go through life a happy man, because thou hast paid back the wrong, and obeyed the mandate of the past. He looked at her, and then stretched out his hand and lifted her to her feet. Rise, Aisha, he said sadly. Well, thou knowest that I cannot strike thee, no, not even for the sake of her whom thou slewest but last night. I am in thy power, and a very slave to thee. How can I kill thee? Sooner should I slay myself. Almost dost thou begin to love me, Callicrates, she answered, smiling. And now tell me of thy country. 'Tis a great people, is it not? With an empire like that of Rome. Surely thou wouldst return thither, and it is well, for I mean not that thou shouldst dwell in these caves of Kor. Nay, when once thou art even as I am, we will go hence. Fear not but that I shall find a path, and then shall we journey to this England of thine, and live as it becometh us to live. 2,000 years have I waited for the day when I should see the last of these hateful caves and this gloomy-visaged folk, and now it is at hand, and my heart bounds up to meet it like a child's towards its holiday, for thou shalt rule this England. But we have a queen already, broke in Leo hastily. It is not, said Aisha. She can be overthrown. At this we both broke out into an exclamation of dismay, and explained that we should as soon think of overthrowing ourselves. But here is a strange thing, said Aisha in astonishment. A queen whom her people love. Surely the world must have changed since I dwelt in Kor. Again we explained that it was the character of monarchs that had changed, and that the one under whom we lived was venerated and beloved by all right-thinking people in her vast realms. Also, we told her that real power in our country rested in the hands of the people, and that we were in fact ruled by the votes of the lower and least educated classes of the community. Ah, she said, a democracy, then surely there is a tyrant, for I have long since seen that democracies, having no clear will of their own, in the end set up a tyrant and worship him. Yes, I said, we have our tyrants. Well, she answered resignedly, we can at any rate destroy these tyrants, and Callicrates shall rule the land. I instantly informed Aisha that in England blasting was not an amusement that could be indulged in with impunity, and that any such attempt would meet with the consideration of the law and probably end upon a scaffold. The law, she laughed with scorn. The law. Canst thou not understand, O Holly, that I am above the law, and so shall my Callicrates be also? All human law will be to us as the north wind to a mountain. Does the wind bend the mountain, or the mountain the wind? And now leave me, I pray thee, and thou too, my own Callicrates, for I would get me ready against our journey, and so must ye both, and your servant also. But bring no great quantity of things with thee, for I trust that we shall be but 3 days gone. Then shall we return hither, and I will make a plan whereby we can bid farewell forever to these sepulchres of Kor. Yea, surely thou mayst kiss my hand. So we went, I, for one, meditating deeply on the awful nature of the problem that now opened out before us. The terrible she had evidently made up her mind to go to England, and it made me absolutely shudder to think what would be the result of her arrival there. What her powers were I knew, and I could not doubt but that she would exercise them to the full. It might be possible to control her for a while, but her proud, ambitious spirit would be certain to break loose and avenge itself for the long centuries of its solitude. She would, if necessary, and if the power of her beauty did not unaided prove equal to the occasion, blast her way to any end she set before her, and as she could not die, and for aught I knew could not even be killed. What was there to stop her? In the end she would, I had little doubt, assume absolute rule over the British dominions, and probably over the whole earth. And though I was sure that she would speedily make ours the most glorious and prosperous empire that the world has ever seen, it would be at the cost of a terrible sacrifice of life. I regret to say that I was never able to ascertain if she was invulnerable against the ordinary accidents of life. Presumably this was so, else some misadventure would have been sure to put an end to her in the course of so many centuries. True, She offered to let Leo slay her, but very probably this was only an experiment to try his temper and mental attitude towards her. Aisha never gave way to impulse without some valid object. The whole thing sounded like a dream or some extraordinary invention of a speculative brain. And yet it was a fact, a wonderful fact, of which the whole world would soon be called on to take notice. What was the meaning of it all? After much thinking, I could only conclude that this marvelous creature, whose passion had kept her for so many centuries chained as it were, and comparatively harmless, was now about to be used by Providence as a means to change the order of the world, and possibly, by the building up of a power that could no more be rebelled against or questioned than the decrees of fate, to change it materially for the better. 23. The Temple of Truth. Our preparations did not take us very long. We put a change of clothing apiece and some spare boots into my Gladstone bag. Also we took our revolvers and an express rifle each, together with a good supply of ammunition, a precaution to which, under Providence, we subsequently owed our lives over and over again. The rest of our gear, together with our heavy rifles, we left behind us. A few minutes before the appointed time we once more attended in Aisha's boudoir, and found her also ready, her dark cloak thrown over her winding sheet-like wrappings. "Are ye prepared for the great venture?" she said. "We are," I answered. "Though for my part, Aisha, I have no faith in it." "Ah, my Holly," she said, "thou art of a truth like those old Jews, of whom the memory vexes me so sorely, unbelieving, and hard to accept that which they have not known. But thou shalt see, for unless my mirror beyond lies," and she pointed to the font of crystal water, "the path is yet open as it was of old time. And now let us start upon the new life which shall end. Who knoweth where?" "Ah," I echoed, "who knoweth where?" And we passed down into the great central cave, and out into the light of day. At the mouth of the cave we found a single litter with 6 bearers, all of them mutes, waiting, and with them I was relieved to see our old friend Bilali, for whom I had conceived a sort of affection. It appeared that, for reasons not necessary to explain at length, Aisha had thought it best that, with the exception of herself, we should proceed on foot, and this we were nothing loath to do, after our long confinement in these caves, which, however suitable they might be for sarcophagi, a singularly inappropriate word, by the way, for these particular tombs, which certainly did not consume the bodies given to their keeping, were depressing habitations for breathing mortals like ourselves, either by accident or by the orders of she. The space in front of the cave where we had beheld that awful dance was perfectly clear of spectators. Not a soul was to be seen, and consequently I do not believe that our departure was known to anybody, except perhaps the mutes who waited on she, and they were, of course, in the habit of keeping what they saw to themselves. In a few minutes' time we were stepping out sharply across the great cultivated plain or lake bed, framed like a vast emerald in its setting of frowning cliff, and had another opportunity of wondering at the extraordinary nature of the site chosen by these old people of Kor for their capital, and at the marvelous amount of labor, ingenuity, and engineering skill that must have been brought into requisition by the founders of the city to drain so huge a sheet of water, and to keep it clear of subsequent accumulations. It is, indeed, so far as my experience goes, an unequaled instance of what man can do in the face of nature, for in my opinion such achievements as the Suez Canal, or even the Mont Cenis Tunnel do not approach this ancient undertaking in magnitude and grandeur of conception. When we had been walking for about half an hour, enjoying ourselves exceedingly in the delightful cool which about this time of the day always appeared to descend upon the great plain of Kor, and which in some degree atoned for the want of any land or sea breeze, for all wind was kept off by the rocky mountain wall, we began to get a clear view of what Bilali had informed us were the ruins of the great city, and even from that distance we could see how wonderful those ruins were, a fact which with every step we took became more evident. The town was not very large if compared to Babylon or Thebes, or other cities of remote antiquity. Perhaps its outer wall contained some 12 square miles of ground, or a little more. Nor had the walls, so far as we could judge when we reached them, been very high, probably not more than 40 feet, which was about their present height where they had not through the sinking of the ground, or some such cause, fallen into ruin. The reason of this, no doubt, was that the people of Kor, being protected from any outside attack by far more tremendous ramparts than any that the hand of man could rear, only required them for show and to guard against civil discord. But on the other hand they were as broad as they were high, built entirely of dressed stone, hewn, no doubt, from the vast caves, and surrounded by a great moat about 60 feet in width, some reaches of which were still filled with water. About 10 minutes before the sun finally sank we reached this moat, and passed down and through it, clambering across what evidently were the piled-up fragments of a great bridge in order to do so, and then with some little difficulty over the slope of the wall to its summit. I wish that it lay within the power of my pen to give some idea of the grandeur of the sight that then met our view. There, all bathed in the red glow of the sinking sun, were miles upon miles of ruins, columns, temples, shrines, and the palaces of kings, varied with patches of green bush. Of course, the roofs of these buildings had long since fallen into decay and vanished, but owing to the extreme massiveness of the style of building, and to the hardness and durability of the rock employed, most of the party walls and great columns still remained standing. 1. In connection with the extraordinary state of preservation of these ruins after so vast a lapse of time, at least 6,000 years, it must be remembered that Kor was not burnt or destroyed by an enemy or an earthquake, but deserted, owing to the action of a terrible plague. Consequently, the houses were left unharmed. Also, the climate of the plain is remarkably fine and dry, and there is very little rain or wind, as a result of which these relics have only to contend against the unaided action of time, that works but slowly upon such massive blocks of masonry. Straight before us stretched away what had evidently been the main thoroughfare of the city, for it was very wide, wider than the Thames embankment, and regular, being, as we afterwards discovered, paved or rather built, throughout of blocks of dressed stone, such as were employed in the walls. It was but little overgrown even now with grass and shrubs that could get no depth of soil to live in. What had been the parks and gardens, on the contrary, were now dense jungle. Indeed, it was easy even from a distance to trace the course of the various roads by the burnt-up appearance of the scanty grass that grew upon them. On either side of this great thoroughfare were vast blocks of ruins, each block, generally speaking, being separated from its neighbor by a space of what had once, I suppose, been garden ground, but was now dense and tangled bush. They were all built of the same colored stone, and most of them had pillars, which was as much as we could make out in the fading light as we passed swiftly up the main road, that I believe I am right in saying no living foot had pressed for thousands of years. 2. Bilali told me that the Haggard believed that the site of the city is haunted, and could not be persuaded to enter it upon any consideration. Indeed, I could see that he himself did not at all like doing so, and was only consoled by the reflection that he was under the direct protection of she. It struck Leo and myself as very curious that a people which has no objection to living amongst the dead, with whom their familiarity has perhaps bred contempt, and even using their bodies for purposes of fuel, should be terrified at approaching the habitations that these very departed had occupied when alive. After all, however, it is only a savage inconsistency to LHH. Presently we came to an enormous pile, which we rightly took to be a temple covering at least 8 acres of ground, and apparently arranged in a series of courts, each one enclosing another of smaller size, on the principle of a Chinese nest of boxes, the courts being separated one from the other by rows of huge columns. And while I think of it, I may as well state a remarkable thing about the shape of these columns, which resembled none that I have ever seen or heard of, being fashioned with a kind of waist at the center, and swelling out above and below. At first we thought that this shape was meant to roughly symbolize or suggest the female form, as was a common habit amongst the ancient religious architects of many creeds. On the following day, however, as we went up the slopes of the mountain, we discovered a large quantity of the most stately-looking palms, of which the trunks grew exactly in this shape, and I have now no doubt but that the first designer of those columns drew his inspiration from the graceful bends of those very palms, or rather of their ancestors, which then, some 8 or 10,000 years ago, as now, beautified the slopes of the mountain that had once formed the shores of the volcanic lake. At the facade of this huge temple, which I should imagine, is almost as large as that of El Karnak, at Thebes, some of the largest columns which I measured, being between 18 to 20 feet in diameter at the base, by about 70 feet in height, our little procession was halted, and Aisha descended from her litter. There was a spot here, Callicrates, she said to Leo, who had run up to help her down, where one might sleep. 2,000 years ago did thou and I and that Egyptian asp rest therein. But since then have I not set foot here, nor any man, and perchance it has fallen. And followed by the rest of us, she passed up a vast flight of broken and ruined steps into the outer court, and looked round into the gloom. Presently she seemed to recollect, and walking a few paces along the wall to the left, halted. It is here, she said, and at the same time beckoned to the two mutes, who were loaded with provisions and our little belongings, to advance. One of them came forward, and producing a lamp, lit it from his brazier, for the Haggard when on a journey nearly always carried with them a little lighted brazier, from which to provide fire. The tinder of this brazier was made of broken fragments of mummy carefully damped, and if the admixture of moisture was properly managed, this unholy compound would smolder away for hours. 3. As soon as the lamp was lit we entered the place before which Aisha had halted. It turned out to be a chamber hollowed in the thickness of the wall, and from the fact of there still being a massive stone table in it, I should think that it had probably served as a living room, perhaps for one of the doorkeepers of the great temple. 3. After all, we are not much in advance of the Haggard in these matters. Mummy, that is pounded ancient Egyptian, is, I believe, a pigment much used by artists, and especially by those of them who direct their talents to the reproduction of the works of the old masters. Editor. Here we stopped, and after cleaning the place out and making it as comfortable as circumstances and the darkness would permit, we ate some cold meat, at least Leo, Job and I did, for Aisha, as I think I have said elsewhere, never touched anything except cakes of flour, fruit and water. While we were still eating, the moon, which was at her full, rose above the mountain wall, and began to flood the place with silver. What ye why I have brought you here tonight, my Holly, said Aisha, leaning her head upon her hand and watching the great orb as she rose, like some heavenly queen, above the solemn pillars of the temple. I brought you, nay, it is strange, but knowest thou, Callicrates, that thou liest at this moment upon the very spot where thy dead body lay when I bore thee back to those caves of Kor so many years ago? It all returns to my mind now. I can see it, and horrible is it to my sight. And she shuddered. Here Leo jumped up and hastily changed his seat. However the reminiscence might affect Aisha, it clearly had few charms for him. I brought you, went on Aisha presently, that ye might look upon the most wonderful sight that ever the eye of man beheld, the full moon shining over ruined Kor. When ye have done your eating, I would that I could teach you to eat naught but fruit, Callicrates, but that will come after thou hast laved in the fire. Once I too ate flesh like a brute beast. When ye have done we will go out, and I will show you this great temple and the God whom men once worshipped therein. Of course we got up at once, and started. And here again my pen fails me. To give a string of measurements and details of the various courts of the temple would only be wearisome, supposing that I had them. And yet I know not how I am to describe what we saw, magnificent as it was even in its ruin, almost beyond the power of realization. Court upon dim court, row upon row of mighty pillars, some of them, especially at the gateways, sculptured from pedestal to capital, space upon space of empty chambers that spoke more eloquently to the imagination than any crowded streets. And over all, the dead silence of the dead, the sense of utter loneliness, and the brooding spirit of the past. How beautiful it was, and yet how drear. We did not dare to speak aloud. Aisha herself was awed in the presence of an antiquity compared to which even her length of days was but a little thing. We only whispered, and our whispers seemed to run from column to column, till they were lost in the quiet air. Bright fell the moonlight on pillar and court and shattered wall, hiding all their rents and imperfections in its silver garment, and clothing their hoar majesty with the peculiar glory of the night. It was a wonderful sight to see the full moon looking down on the ruined fane of Kor. It was a wonderful thing to think for how many thousands of years the dead orb above and the dead city below had gazed thus upon each other, and in the utter solitude of space poured forth each to each the tale of their lost life and long-departed glory. The white light fell, and minute by minute the quiet shadows crept across the grass-grown courts like the spirits of old priests haunting the habitations of their worship. The white light fell, and the long shadows grew till the beauty and grandeur of each scene, and the untamed majesty of its present death, seemed to sink into our very souls. and speak more loudly than the shouts of armies concerning the pomp and splendor that the grave had swallowed, and even memory had forgotten. Come, said Aisha, after we had gazed and gazed, I know not for how long, and I will show you the stony flower of loveliness and wonder's very crown. If yet it stands to mock time with its beauty and fill the heart of man with longing for that which is behind the veil. And without waiting for an answer, she led us through 2 more pillared courts into the inner shrine of the old fane. And there, in the center of the inmost court, that might have been some 50 yards square, or a little more, we stood face to face with what is perhaps the grandest allegorical work of art that the genius of her children has ever given to the world. For in the exact center of the court, placed upon a thick square slab of rock, was a huge round ball of dark stone, some 20 feet in diameter, and standing on the ball was a colossal winged figure of a beauty so entrancing and divine that when I first gazed upon it, illuminated and shadowed as it was by the soft light of the moon, my breath stood still, and for an instant my heart ceased its beating. The statue was hewn from marble so pure and white that even now, after all those ages, it shone as the moonbeams danced upon it, and its height was, I should say, a trifle over 20 feet. It was the winged figure of a woman of such marvelous loveliness and delicacy of form that the size seemed rather to add to than to detract from its so human, and yet more spiritual beauty. She was bending forward and poising herself upon her half-spread wings as though to preserve her balance as she leant. Her arms were outstretched like those of some woman about to embrace one she dearly loved, while her whole attitude gave an impression of the tenderest beseeching. Her perfect and most gracious form was naked save, and here came the extraordinary thing, the face which was thinly veiled, so that we could only trace the marking of her features. A gauzy veil was thrown round and about the head, and of its 2 ends one fell down across her left breast, which was outlined beneath it, and one, now broken, streamed away upon the air behind her. Who is she? I asked, as soon as I could take my eyes off the statue. Canst thou not guess, O Holly? Answered Aisha. Where then is thy imagination? It is truth standing on the world, and calling to its children to unveil her face. See what is writ upon the pedestal. Without doubt it is taken from the book of scriptures of these men of Kor. And she led the way to the foot of the statue, where an inscription of the usual Chinese-looking hieroglyphics was so deeply graven as to be still quite legible, at least to Aisha. According to her translation it ran thus: Is there no man that will draw my veil and look upon my face, for it is very fair? Unto him who draws my veil shall I be, and peace will I give him, and sweet children of knowledge and good works. And a voice cried, Though all those who seek after thee desire thee, behold, virgin art thou, and virgin shalt thou go till time be done. No man is there born of woman who may draw thy veil and live, nor shall be. By death only can thy veil be drawn, O Truth. And Truth stretched out her arms and wept, because those who sought her might not find her, nor look upon her face to face. Thou sayest, said Aisha, when she had finished translating. Truth was the goddess of the people of old Kor, and to her they built their shrines, and her they sought, knowing that they should never find, still sought they. And so, I added sadly, do men seek to this very hour, but they find out, and as this scripture saith, nor shall they, for in death only is truth found. Then with one more look at this veiled and spiritualized loveliness, which was so perfect and so pure that one might almost fancy that the light of a living spirit shone through the marble prison to lead man on to high and ethereal thoughts, this poet's dream of beauty frozen into stone, which I shall never forget while I live, we turned and went back through the vast moonlit courts to the spot whence we had started. I never saw the statue again, which I the more regret, because on the great ball of stone representing the world whereon the figure stood, lines were drawn, that probably, had there been light enough, we should have discovered to be a map of the universe as it was known to the people of Kor. It is at any rate suggestive of some scientific knowledge that these long-dead worshippers of truth had recognized the fact that the globe is round. 24. Walking the plank. Next day the mutes woke us before the dawn, and by the time that we had got the sleep out of our eyes, and gone through a perfunctory wash at a spring which still welled up into the remains of a marble basin in the center of the north quadrangle of the vast outer court, we found she standing by the litter ready to start, while old Bilali and the 2 bearer mutes were busy collecting the baggage. As usual, Aisha was veiled like the marble truth. By the way, I wonder if she originally got the idea of covering up her beauty from that statue. I noticed, however, that she seemed very depressed, and had none of that proud and buoyant bearing which would have betrayed her among 1,000 women of the same stature, even if they had been veiled like herself. She looked up as we came, for her head was bowed, and greeted us. Leo asked her how she had slept. "Ill, my Callicrates," she answered, "ill. This night have strange and hideous dreams come creeping through my brain, and I know not what they may portend. Almost do I feel as though some evil overshadowed me. And yet how can evil touch me? I wonder," she went on with a sudden outbreak of womanly tenderness, "I wonder if, should aught happen to me, so that I slept a while and left thee waking, thou wouldst think gently of me? I wonder, my Callicrates, if thou wouldst tarry till I came again, as for so many centuries I have tarried for thy coming." Then, without waiting for an answer, she went on. "Come, let us be setting forth, for we have far to go, and before another day is born in yonder blue should we stand in the place of life." In 5 minutes we were once more on our way through the vast ruined city, which loomed at us on either side in the grey dawning in a way that was at once grand and oppressive. Just as the first ray of the rising sun shot like a golden arrow athwart this storied desolation, we gained the further gateway of the outer wall, and having given one more glance at the hoar and pillared majesty through which we had journeyed, and with the exception of Job, for whom ruins had no charms, breathed a sigh of regret that we had not had more time to explore it, passed through the great moat, and on to the plain beyond. As the sun rose, so did Aisha's spirits, till by breakfast time they had regained their normal level, and she laughingly set down her previous depression to the associations of the spot where she had slept. "These barbarians swear that Kor is haunted," she said, "and of a truth I do believe their saying, for never did I know so ill a night save one. I remember it now. It was on that very spot when thou didst lie dead at my feet, Callicrates. Never will I visit it again. It is a place of evil omen." After a very brief halt for breakfast, we pressed on with such good will that by 2 o'clock in the afternoon we were at the foot of the vast wall of rock that formed the lip of the volcano, and which at this point towered up precipitously above us for 1,500 or 2,000 feet. Here we halted, certainly not to my astonishment, for I did not see how it was possible that we should go any farther. "Now," said Aisha, as she descended from her litter, "doth our labor but commence, for here do we part with these men, and henceforward must we bear ourselves." And then, addressing Bilali, "Do thou and these slaves remain here, and abide our coming. By tomorrow at the midday shall we be with thee, if not, wait." Bilali bowed humbly, and said that her august bidding should be obeyed if they stopped there till they grew old. "And this man, O Holly," said she, pointing to Job, "best is it that he should tarry also, for if his heart be not high and his courage great, perchance some evil might overtake him. Also, the secrets of the place whither we go are not fit for common eyes." I translated this to Job, who instantly and earnestly entreated me, almost with tears in his eyes, not to leave him behind. He said he was sure that he could see nothing worse than he had already seen, and that he was terrified to death at the idea of being left alone with those dumb folk, who, he thought, would probably take the opportunity to hotpot him. I translated what he said to Aisha, who shrugged her shoulders and answered, "Well, let him come, it is not to me, on his own head be it, and he will serve to bear the lamp in this." And she pointed to a narrow plank, some 16 feet in length, which had been bound above the long bearing pole of her hammock, as I had thought to make curtains spread out better, but as it now appeared, for some unknown purpose connected with our extraordinary undertaking. Accordingly, the plank, which though tough, was very light, was given to Job to carry, and also one of the lamps. I slung the other onto my back, together with a spare jar of oil, while Leo loaded himself with the provisions and some water in a kid skin. When this was done, she bade Bilali and the 6 bearer mutes to retreat behind a grove of flowering magnolias about 100 yards away, and remain there under pain of death till we had vanished. They bowed humbly, and went, and as he departed, old Bilali gave me a friendly shake of the hand, and whispered that he had rather that it was I than he who was going on this wonderful expedition with she who must be obeyed. And upon my word I felt inclined to agree with him. In another minute they were gone, and then, having briefly asked us if we were ready, Aisha turned, and gazed up the towering cliff. "Goodness me, Leo," I said, "surely we are not going to climb that precipice." Leo shrugged his shoulders, being in a condition of half-fascinated, half-expectant mystification. And as he did so, Aisha with a sudden move began to climb the cliff. And of course we had to follow her. It was perfectly marvelous to see the ease and grace with which she sprang from rock to rock, and swung herself along the ledges. The ascent was not, however, so difficult as it seemed, although there were one or two nasty places where it did not do to look behind you, the fact being that the rock still sloped here, and was not absolutely precipitous as it was higher up. In this way we, with no great labor, mounted to the height of some 50 feet above our last standing place, the only really troublesome thing to manage being Job's board, and in doing so drew some 50 or 60 paces to the left of our starting point, for we went up like a crab sideways. Presently we reached a ledge, narrow enough at first, but which widened as we followed it, and moreover sloped inwards like the petal of a flower, so that as we followed it we gradually got into a kind of rut or fold of rock, that grew deeper and deeper, till at last it resembled a Devonshire lane in stone, and hid us perfectly from the gaze of anybody on the slope below, if there had been anybody to gaze. This lane, which appeared to be a natural formation, continued for some 50 or 60 paces, and then suddenly ended in a cave, also natural, running at right angles to it. I am sure it was a natural cave, and not hollowed by the hand of man, because of its irregular and contorted shape and course, which gave it the appearance of having been blown bodily in the mountain by some frightful eruption of gas following the line of the least resistance. All the caves hollowed by the ancients of Kor, on the contrary, were cut out with the most perfect regularity and symmetry. At the mouth of this cave Aisha halted, and bade us light the 2 lamps, which I did, giving one to her and keeping the other myself. Then, taking the lead, she advanced down the cavern, picking her way with great care, as indeed it was necessary to do, for the floor was most irregular, strewn with boulders like the bed of a stream, and in some places pitted with deep holes, in which it would have been easy to break one's leg. This cavern we pursued for 20 minutes or more, it being, so far as I could form a judgment, owing to its numerous twists and turns no easy task, about 1/4 of a mile long. At last, however, we halted at its farther end, and whilst I was still trying to pierce the gloom a great gust of air came tearing down it, and extinguished both the lamps. Aisha called to us, and we crept up to her, for she was a little in front, and were rewarded with a view that was positively appalling in its gloom and grandeur. Before us was a mighty chasm in the black rock, jagged and torn and splintered through it in a far past age by some awful convulsion of nature, as though it had been cleft by stroke upon stroke of the lightning. This chasm, which was bounded by a precipice on the hither, and presumably, though we could not see it, on the farther side also, may have measured any width across, but from its darkness I do not think it can have been very broad. It was impossible to make out much of its outline, or how far it ran, for the simple reason that the point where we were standing was so far from the upper surface of the cliff, at least 1,500 or 2,000 feet, that only a very dim light struggled down to us from above. The mouth of the cavern that we had been following gave on to a most curious and tremendous spur of rock, which jutted out in mid-air into the gulf before us, for a distance of some 50 yards, coming to a sharp point at its termination, and resembling nothing that I can think of so much as the spur upon the leg of a cock in shape. This huge spur was attached only to the parent precipice at its base, which was of course enormous, just as the cock's spur is attached to its leg. Otherwise it was utterly unsupported. "Here must we pass," said Aisha. "Be careful lest giddiness overcome you, or the wind sweep you into the gulf beneath, for of a truth it hath no bottom." And without giving us any further time to get scared, she started walking along the spur, leaving us to follow her as best we might. I was next to her, then came Job, painfully dragging his plank, while Leo brought up the rear. It was a wonderful sight to see this intrepid woman gliding fearlessly along that dreadful place. For my part, when I had gone but a very few yards, what between the pressure of the air and the awful sense of the consequences that a slip would entail, I found it necessary to go down on my hands and knees and crawl, and so did the other two. But Aisha never condescended to this. On she went, leaning her body against the gusts of wind, and never seeming to lose her head or her balance. In a few minutes we had crossed some 20 paces of this awful bridge, which got narrower at every step, and then all of a sudden a great gust came tearing along the gorge. I saw Aisha lean herself against it, But the strong draught got under her dark cloak, and tore it from her, and away it went down the wind flapping like a wounded bird. It was dreadful to see it go, till it was lost in the blackness. I clung to the saddle of rock, and looked round, while like a living thing, the great spur vibrated with a humming sound beneath us. The sight was a truly awesome one. There we were poised in the gloom between earth and heaven. Beneath us were hundreds upon hundreds of feet of emptiness that gradually grew darker, till at last it was absolutely black, and at what depth it ended is more than I can guess. Above was space upon space of giddy air, and far, far away a line of blue sky. And down this vast gulf upon which we were pinnacled the great draught dashed and roared, driving clouds and misty wreaths of vapor before it, till we were nearly blinded, and utterly confused. The whole position was so tremendous and so absolutely unearthly, that I believe it actually lulled our sense of terror, but to this hour I often see it in my dreams, and at its mere fantasy wake up covered with cold sweat. On! On! Cried the white form before us, for now the cloak had gone. She was robed in white, and looked more like a spirit riding down the gale than a woman. On, or ye will fall and be dashed to pieces. Keep your eyes fixed upon the ground, and closely hug the rock. We obeyed her, and crept painfully along the quivering path, against which the wind shrieked and wailed as it shook it, causing it to murmur like a vast tuning fork. On we went, I do not know for how long, only gazing round now and again, when it was absolutely necessary, until at last we saw that we were on the very tip of the spur, a slab of rock, little larger than an ordinary table, that throbbed and jumped like any over-engined steamer. There we lay, clinging to the ground, and looked about us, while Aisha stood leaning out against the wind, down which her long hair streamed, and absolutely heedless of the hideous depth that yawned beneath, pointed before her. Then we saw why the narrow plank had been provided, which Job and I had painfully dragged along between us. Before us was an empty space, on the other side of which was something, as yet we could not see what, for here, either owing to the shadow of the opposite cliff, or from some other cause, the gloom was that of night. We must wait a while, called Aisha. Soon there will be light. At the moment I could not imagine what she meant. How could more light than there was ever come to this dreadful spot? While I was still wondering, suddenly, like a great sword of flame, a beam from the setting sun pierced the Stygian gloom, and smote upon the point of rock whereon we lay, illumining Aisha's lovely form with an unearthly splendor. I only wish I could describe the wild and marvelous beauty of that sword of fire, laid across the darkness and rushing mist wreaths of the gulf. How it got there I do not to this moment know, but I presume that there was some cleft or hole in the opposing cliff, through which it pierced when the setting orb was in a direct line therewith. All I can say is that the effect was the most wonderful that I ever saw. Right through the heart of the darkness that flaming sword was stabbed, and where it lay there was the most surpassingly vivid light, so vivid that even at a distance we could see the grain of the rock, while, outside of it, yes, within a few inches of its keen edge, was naught but clustering shadows. And now, by this ray of light, for which she had been waiting, and timed our arrival to meet, knowing that at this season for thousands of years it had always struck thus at sunset, we saw what was before us. Within 11 or 12 feet of the very tip of the tongue-like rock whereon we stood there arose, presumably from the far bottom of the gulf, a sugarloaf-shaped cone, of which the summit was exactly opposite to us. But had there been a summit only it would not have helped us much, for the nearest point of its circumference was some 40 feet from where we were. On the lip of this summit, however, which was circular and hollow, rested a tremendous flat boulder, something like a glacier stone. Perhaps it was one, for all I know to the contrary, and the end of this boulder approached to within 12 feet or so of us. This huge rock was nothing more or less than a gigantic rocking stone, accurately balanced upon the edge of the cone or miniature crater, like a half-crown on the rim of a wineglass, for in the fierce light that played upon it and us, we could see it oscillating in the gusts of wind. "Quick," said Aisha. "The plank. We must cross while the light endures. Presently it will be gone." "Oh Lord, sir," groaned Job. "Surely she don't mean us to walk across that there place on that there thing." As in obedience to my direction he pushed the long board towards me. "That's it, Job." I halloed in ghastly merriment, though the idea of walking the plank was no pleasanter to me than to him. I pushed the board on to Aisha, who deftly ran it across the gulf so that one end of it rested on the rocking stone, the other remaining on the extremity of the trembling spur. Then placing her foot upon it to prevent it from being blown away, she turned to me. "Since I was last here, O Holly," she called, "the support of the moving stone hath lessened somewhat, so that I am not certain if it will bear our weight or no. Therefore will I cross the first, because no harm will come unto me." And without further ado, she trod lightly but firmly across the frail bridge, and in another second was standing safe upon the heaving stone. "It is safe," she called. "See, hold thou the plank. I will stand on the farther side of the stone so that it may not overbalance with your greater weights. Now come, O Holly, for presently the light will fail us." I struggled to my knees, and if ever I felt terrified in my life it was then, and I am not ashamed to say that I hesitated and hung back. "Surely thou art not afraid?" this strange creature called in a lull of the gale, from where she stood poised like a bird on the highest point of the rocking stone. "Make way then for Callicrates." This settled me. It is better to fall down a precipice and die than be laughed at by such a woman. So I clenched my teeth, and in another instant I was on that horrible, narrow, bending plank, with bottomless space beneath and around me. I have always hated a great height, but never before did I realize the full horrors of which such a position is capable. Oh, the sickening sensation of that yielding board resting on the two moving supports. I grew dizzy, and thought that I must fall. My spine crept. It seemed to me that I was falling, and my delight at finding myself sprawling upon that stone, which rose and fell beneath me like a boat in a swell, cannot be expressed in words. All I know is that briefly, but earnestly enough, I thanked Providence for preserving me so far. Then came Leo's turn, and though he looked rather queer, he came across like a rope dancer. Aisha stretched out her hand to clasp his own, and I heard her say, "Bravely done, my love, bravely done. The old Greek spirit lives in thee yet." And now only poor Job remained on the farther side of the gulf. He crept up to the plank and yelled out, "I can't do it, sir. I shall fall into that beastly place." "You must," I remember saying with inappropriate facetiousness. "You must, Job. It's as easy as catching flies." I suppose that I must have said it to satisfy my conscience, because although the expression conveys a wonderful idea of facility, as a matter of fact I know no more difficult operation in the whole world than catching flies. That is, in warm weather, unless, indeed, it is catching mosquitoes. "I can't, sir, I can't indeed." "Let the man come, or let him stop and perish there. See, the light is dying." "In a moment it will be gone," said Aisha. I looked. She was right. The sun was passing below the level of the hole, or cleft in the precipice, through which the ray reached us. "If you stop there, Job, you will die alone," I called. "The light is going." "Come, be a man, Job," roared Leo. "It's quite easy." Thus adjured, the miserable Job, with a most awful yell, precipitated himself face downwards on the plank. He did not dare, small blame to him, to try to walk it, and commenced to draw himself across in little jerks, his poor legs hanging down on either side into the nothingness beneath. His violent jerks at the frail board made the great stone, which was only balanced on a few inches of rock, oscillate in a most dreadful manner, and to make matters worse, when he was halfway across the flying ray of lurid light suddenly went out, just as though a lamp had been extinguished in a curtained room, leaving the whole howling wilderness of air black with darkness. "Come on, Job, for God's sake!" I shouted in an agony of fear, while the stone, gathering motion with every swing, rocked so violently that it was difficult to hang on to it. It was a truly awful position. "Lord, have mercy on me!" cried poor Job from the darkness. "Oh, the plank's slipping!" And I heard a violent struggle, and thought that he was gone. But at that moment his outstretched hand, clasping in agony at the air, met my own, and I hauled. Ah, how I did haul, putting out all the strength that it has pleased Providence to give me in such abundance. And to my joy in another minute Job was gasping on the rock beside me. But the plank, I felt it slip, and heard it knock against a projecting knob of rock, and it was gone. "Great heavens!" I exclaimed. "How are we going to get back?" "I don't know," answered Leo, out of the gloom. "Sufficient to the day is the evil thereof. I am thankful enough to be here." But Aisha merely called to me to take her hand and creep after her. 25. The Spirit of Life. I did as I was bid, and in fear and trembling felt myself guided over the edge of the stone. I sprawled my legs out, but could touch nothing. I am going to fall, I gasped. Nay, let thyself go, and trust to me, answered Aisha. Now, if the position is considered, it will be easily understood that this was a greater demand upon my confidence than was justified by my knowledge of Aisha's character. For all I knew, she might be in the very act of consigning me to a horrible doom. But in life we sometimes have to lay our faith upon strange altars, and so it was now. Let thyself go, she cried, and having no choice I did. I felt myself slide a pace or two down the sloping surface of the rock, and then pass into the air, and the thought flashed through my brain that I was lost. But no. In another instant my feet struck against a rocky floor, and I felt that I was standing upon something solid, and out of reach of the wind, which I could hear singing away overhead. As I stood there thanking heaven for these small mercies, there was a slip and a scuffle, and down came Leo alongside of me. Hello, old fellow, he called out. Are you there? This is getting interesting, is it not? Just then, with a terrific yell, Job arrived right on the top of us, knocking us both down. By the time we had struggled to our feet again, Aisha was standing among us, and bidding us light the lamps, which fortunately remained uninjured, as also did the spare jar of oil. I got out my box of wax matches, and they struck as merrily there, in that awful place, as they could have done in a London drawing room. In a couple of minutes both the lamps were alight and revealed a curious scene. We were huddled together in a rocky chamber, some 10 feet square, and scared enough we looked. That is, except Aisha, who was standing calmly with her arms folded, and waiting for the lamps to burn up. The chamber appeared to be partly natural, and partly hollowed out of the top of the cone. The roof of the natural part was formed of the swinging stone, and that of the back part of the chamber, which sloped downwards, was hewn from the live rock. For the rest, the place was warm and dry, a perfect haven of rest compared to the giddy pinnacle above, and the quivering spur that shot out to meet it in mid-air. So, said she, safely have we come, though once I feared that the rocking stone would fall with you, and precipitate you into the bottomless depths beneath, for I do believe that the cleft goeth down to the very womb of the world. The rock whereon the stone resteth hath crumbled beneath the swinging weight. And now that he, nodding towards Job, who was sitting on the floor, feebly wiping his forehead with a red cotton pocket handkerchief, whom they rightly call the pig, for as a pig is he stupid, hath let fall the plank, it will not be easy to return across the gulf, and to that end must I make a plan. But now rest a while, and look upon this place. What think ye that it is? We know not, I answered. Wouldst thou believe, O Holly, that once a man did choose this airy nest for a daily habitation, and did here endure for many years, leaving it only but one day in every 12 to seek food and water and oil that the people brought, more than he could carry, and laid as an offering in the mouth of the tunnel through which we passed hither? We looked up wonderingly, and she continued, Yet so it was. There was a man, Nut he named himself, who, though he lived in the latter days, had of the wisdom of the sons of Kor. A hermit was he, and a philosopher, and greatly skilled in the secrets of nature. And he it was who discovered the fire that I shall show you, which is nature's blood and life, and also that he who bathed therein, and breathed thereof, should live while nature lives. But like unto thee, O Holly, this man Nut would not turn his knowledge to account. Ill, he said, was it for man to live, for man was born to die. Therefore did he tell his secret to none, and therefore did he come and live here, where the seeker after life must pass, and was revered of the Haggard of the day as holy, and a hermit. And when first I came to this country, knowest thou how I came, Callicrates? Another time I will tell thee, for it is a strange tale. I heard of this philosopher, and waited for him when he came to fetch his food, and returned with him hither, though greatly did I fear to tread the gulf. Then did I beguile him with my beauty and my wit, and flatter him with my tongue, so that he led me down and showed me the fire, and told me the secrets of the fire, but he would not suffer me to step therein. And, fearing lest he should slay me, I refrained, knowing that the man was very old, and soon would die. And I returned, having learned from him all that he knew of the wonderful spirit of the world. And that was much, for the man was wise and very ancient, and by purity and abstinence, and the contemplations of his innocent mind, had worn thin the veil between that which we see and the great invisible truths, the whisper of whose wings at times we hear as they sweep through the gross air of the world. Then, it was but a very few days after, I met thee, my Callicrates, who hadst wandered hither with the beautiful Egyptian Ammonites, and I learned to love for the first and last time, once and forever, so that it entered into my mind to come hither with thee, and receive the gift of life for thee and me. Therefore came we, with that Egyptian who would not be left behind. And behold, we found the old man Nut lying but newly dead. There he lay, and his white beard covered him like a garment. And she pointed to a spot near where I was sitting. But surely he hath long since crumbled into dust, and the wind hath borne his ashes hence. Here I put out my hand and felt in the dust, and presently my fingers touched something. It was a human tooth, very yellow but sound. I held it up and showed it to Aisha, who laughed. Yes, she said. It is his without a doubt. Behold what remaineth of Nut, and the wisdom of Nut. One little tooth. And yet that man had all life at his command, and for his conscience' sake would have none of it. Well, he lay there newly dead, and we descended whither I shall lead you. And then, gathering up all my courage, and courting death that I might perchance win so glorious a crown of life, I stepped into the flames, and behold, life such as ye can never know until ye feel it also, flowed into me, and I came forth undying, and lovely beyond imagining. Then did I stretch out mine arms to thee, Callicrates, and bid thee take thine immortal bride, and behold, as I spoke, thou, blinded by my beauty, didst turn from me, and throw thine arms about the neck of Ammonites. And then a great fury filled me, and made me mad, and I seized the javelin that thou didst bear, and stabbed thee, so that there at my very feet, in the place of life, thou didst groan and go down into death. I knew not then that I had strength to slay with mine eyes and by the power of my will. Therefore in my madness slew I with the javelin. 1. It will be observed that Aisha's account of the death of Callicrates differs materially from that written on the potsherd by Ammonites. The writing on the sherd says, Then in her rage did she smite him by her magic, and he died. We never ascertained which was the correct version, but it will be remembered that the body of Callicrates had a spear, wound in the breast, which seems conclusive, unless, indeed, it was inflicted after death. Another thing that we never ascertained was how the two women, she and the Egyptian Ammonites, were able to bear the corpse of the man they both loved across the dread gulf and along the shaking spur. What a spectacle the two distracted creatures must have presented in their grief and loveliness, as they toiled along that awful place with the dead man between them. Probably, however, the passage was easier than LHH. And when thou wast dead, I wept, because I was undying and thou wast dead. I wept there in the place of life, so that had I been mortal any more my heart had surely broken. And she, the swart Egyptian, she cursed me by her gods. By Osiris did she curse me, and by Isis, by Nephthys and by Anubis, by Sekhet, the cat-headed, and by Set, calling down evil on me, evil and everlasting desolation. I can see her dark face now lowering o'er me like a storm, but she could not hurt me, and I know not if I could hurt her. I did not try, it was not to me then. So together we bore thee hence. And afterwards I sent her, the Egyptian, away through the swamps, and it seems that she lived to bear a son and to write the tale that should lead thee, her husband, back to me, her rival and thy murderess. Such is the tale, my love, and now is the hour at hand that shall set a crown upon it. Like all things on the earth, it is compounded of evil and of good, more of evil than of good, perchance, and writ in letters of blood. It is the truth, naught have I hidden from thee, Callicrates. And now one thing before the final moment of thy trial. We go down into the presence of death, for life and death are very near together, and who knoweth? That might happen which should separate us for another space of waiting. I am but a woman, and no prophetess, and I cannot read the future. But this I know, for I learned it from the lips of the wise man Nut, that my life is but prolonged and made more bright. It cannot live for aye. Therefore, before we go, tell me, O Callicrates, that of a truth thou dost forgive me, and dost love me from thy heart. See, Callicrates, much evil have I done. Perchance it was evil but 2 nights ago to strike that girl who loved thee cold in death, but she disobeyed me and angered me, prophesying misfortune to me, and I smote. Be careful when power comes to thee also, lest thou too shouldst smite in thine anger or thy jealousy, For unconquerable strength is a sore weapon in the hands of erring man. Yeah, I have sinned. Out of the bitterness born of a great love have I sinned. But yet do I know the good from the evil, nor is my heart altogether hardened. Thy love, Callicrates, shall be the gate of my redemption, even as aforetime my passion was the path down which I ran to evil. For deep love unsatisfied is the hell of noble hearts and a portion of the accursed, but love that is mirrored back more perfect from the soul of our desired doth fashion wings to lift us above ourselves, and make us what we might be. Therefore, Callicrates, take me by the hand, and lift my veil with no more fear than though I were some peasant girl, and not the wisest and most beauteous woman in this wide world, and look me in the eyes, and tell me that thou dost forgive me with all thine heart, and that with all thine heart thou dost worship me. She paused, and the strange tenderness in her voice seemed to hover round us like a memory. I know that the sound of it moved me more even than her words. It was so very human, so very womanly. Leo, too, was strangely touched. Hitherto he had been fascinated against his better judgment, something as a bird is fascinated by a snake, but now I think that all this passed away, and he realized that he really loved this strange and glorious creature, as alas, I loved her also. At any rate, I saw his eyes fill with tears, and he stepped swiftly to her and undid the gauzy veil, and then took her by the hand, and, gazing into her deep eyes, said aloud, Aisha, I love thee with all my heart, and so far as forgiveness is possible I forgive thee the death of Ustane. For the rest, it is between thee and thy Maker. I know not of it. I only know that I love thee as I never loved before, and that I will cleave to thee to the end. Now, answered Aisha with proud humility, now when my lord doth speak thus royally and give with so free a hand, it cannot become me to lag behind in words, and be beggared of my generosity. Behold! And she took his hand and placed it upon her shapely head, and then bent herself slowly down till one knee for an instant touched the ground. Behold! In token of submission, do I bow me to my lord. Behold! And she kissed him on the lips. In token of my wifely love do I kiss my lord. Behold! And she laid her hand upon his heart. By the sin I sinned, by my lonely centuries of waiting wherewith it was wiped out, by the great love wherewith I love, and by the Spirit, the eternal thing that doth beget all life, from whom it ebbs, to whom it doth return again, I swear, even in this most holy hour of completed womanhood, that I will abandon evil and cherish good. I swear that I will be ever guided by thy voice in the straightest path of duty. I swear that I will eschew ambition, and through all my length of endless days set wisdom over me as a guiding star to lead me unto truth and a knowledge of the right. I swear also that I will honor and will cherish thee, Callicrates, who hast been swept by the wave of time back into my arms, till the very end, come it soon or late. I swear, nay, I will swear no more, for what are words? Yet shalt thou learn that Aisha hath no false tongue. So I have sworn, and thou, my Holly, art witness to my oath. Here, too, are we wed, my husband, with the gloom for bridal canopy, wed till the end of all things. Here do we write our marriage vows upon the rushing winds which shall bear them up to heaven, and continually round this rolling world. And for a bridal gift I crown thee with my beauty's starry crown, an enduring life, and wisdom without measure, and wealth that none can count. Behold, the great ones of the earth shall creep about thy feet, and its fair women shall cover up their eyes because of the shining glory of thy countenance, and its wise ones shall be abased before thee. Thou shalt read the hearts of men as an open writing, and hither and thither shalt thou lead them as thy pleasure listeth. Like that old Sphinx of Egypt shalt thou sit aloft from age to age, and ever shall they cry to thee to solve the riddle of thy greatness that doth not pass away, and ever shalt thou mock them with thy silence. Behold, once more I kiss thee, and by that kiss I give to thee dominion over sea and earth, over the peasant in his hovel, over the monarch in his palace halls, and cities crowned with towers, and those who breathe therein. Where'er the sun shakes out his spears, and the lonesome waters mirror up the moon, where'er storms roll, and heaven's painted bows arch in the sky, from the pure north clad in snows, across the middle spaces of the world, to where the amorous south, lying like a bride upon her blue couch of seas, breathes in sighs made sweet with the odor of myrtles, there shall thy power pass and thy dominion find a home. Nor sickness, nor icy-fingered fear, nor sorrow, and pale waste of form and mind hovering ever o'er humanity, shall so much as shadow thee with the shadow of their wings. As a god shalt thou be, holding good and evil in the hollow of thy hand, and I, even I humble myself before thee. Such is the power of love, and such is the bridal gift I give unto thee, Callicrates, my lord and lord of all. And now it is done. Now for thee I loose my virgin zone. And come storm, come shine, come good, come evil, come life, come death, it never, never can be undone. For of a truth that which is and being done, is done for aye, and cannot be altered. I have said, let us hence, that all things may be accomplished in their order. And taking one of the lamps, she advanced towards the end of the chamber that was roofed in by the swaying stone, where she halted. We followed her, and perceived that in the wall of the cone there was a stair, or to be more accurate, that some projecting knobs of rock had been so shaped as to form a good imitation of a stair. Down this Aisha began to climb, springing from step to step, like a chamois, and after her we followed with less grace. When we had descended some 15 or 16 steps we found that they ended in a tremendous rocky slope, running first outwards and then inwards, like the slope of an inverted cone, or tunnel. The slope was very steep, and often precipitous, but it was nowhere impassable, and by the light of the lamps we went down it with no great difficulty, though it was gloomy work enough traveling on thus, no one of us knew whither, into the dead heart of a volcano. As we went, however, I took the precaution of noting our route as well as I could, and this was not so very difficult, owing to the extraordinary and most fantastic shape of the rocks that were strewn about, many of which in that dim light looked more like the grim faces carven upon medieval gargoyles than ordinary boulders. For a long time we traveled on thus, half an hour I should say, till, after we had descended for many hundreds of feet, I perceived that we were reaching the point of the inverted cone. In another minute we were there, and found that at the very apex of the funnel was a passage, so low and narrow that we had to stoop as we crept along it in Indian file. After some 50 yards of this creeping, the passage suddenly widened into a cave, so huge that we could see neither the roof nor the sides. We only knew that it was a cave by the echo of our tread and the perfect quiet of the heavy air. On we went for many minutes in absolute awed silence, like lost souls in the depths of Hades, Aisha's white and ghost-like form flitting in front of us, till once more the place ended in a passage which opened into a second cavern much smaller than the first. Indeed, we could clearly make out the arch and stony banks of this second cave, and from their rent and jagged appearance, discovered that, like the first long passage down which we had passed through the cliff before we reached the quivering spur, it had, to all appearance, been torn in the bowels of the rock by the terrific force of some explosive gas. At length this cave ended in a third passage, through which gleamed a faint glow of light. I heard Aisha give a sigh of relief as this light dawned upon us. It is well, she said. Prepare to enter the very womb of the earth, wherein she doth conceive the life that ye see brought forth in man and beast, aye, and in every tree and flower. Swiftly she sped along, and after her we stumbled as best we might, our hearts filled like a cup with mingled dread and curiosity. What were we about to see? We passed down the tunnel. Stronger and stronger the light beamed, reaching us in great flashes like the rays from a lighthouse, as one by one they are thrown wide upon the darkness of the waters. Nor was this all, for with the flashes came a soul-shaking sound like that of thunder and of crashing trees. Now we were through it, and oh heavens! We stood in a third cavern, some 50 feet in length by perhaps as great a height, and 30 wide. It was carpeted with fine white sand, and its walls had been worn smooth by the action of I know not what. The cavern was not dark like the others. It was filled with a soft glow of rose-colored light, more beautiful to look on than anything that can be conceived. But at first we saw no flashes, and heard no more of the thunderous sound. Presently, however, as we stood in amaze, gazing at the marvelous sight, and wondering whence the rosy radiance flowed, a dread and beautiful thing happened. Across the far end of the cavern, with a grinding and crashing noise, a noise so dreadful and awe-inspiring that we all trembled, and Job actually sank to his knees, there flamed out an awful cloud or pillar of fire, like a rainbow many-colored, and like the lightning bright. For a space, perhaps 40 seconds, it flamed and roared thus, turning slowly round and round, and then by degrees the terrible noise ceased, and with the fire it passed away, I know not where, leaving behind it the same rosy glow that we had first seen. Draw near, cried Aisha, with a voice of thrilling exultation. Behold the very fountain and heart of life as it beats in the bosom of the great world. Behold the substance from which all things draw their energy, the bright spirit of the globe, without which it cannot live, but must grow cold and dead as the dead moon. Draw near, and wash you in the living flames, and take their virtue into your poor frames in all its virgin strength, not as it now feebly glows within your bosoms, filtered thereto through all the fine strainers of 1,000 intermediate lives, but as it is here in the very fount and seat of earthly being. We followed her through the rosy glow up to the head of the cave, till at last we stood before the spot where the great pulse beat, and the great flame passed. And as we went we became sensible of a wild and splendid exhilaration, of a glorious sense of such a fierce intensity of life that the most buoyant moments of our strength seemed flat and tame and feeble beside it. It was the mere effluvium of the flame, the subtle ether that it cast off as it passed, working on us, and making us feel strong as giants and swift as eagles. We reached the head of the cave, and gazed at each other in the glorious glow, and laughed aloud. Even Job laughed, and he had not laughed for a week, in the lightness of our hearts and the divine intoxication of our brains. I know that I felt as though all the varied genius of which the human intellect is capable had descended upon me. I could have spoken in blank verse of Shakespearean beauty. All sorts of great ideas flashed through my mind. It was as though the bonds of my flesh had been loosened and left the spirit free to soar to the empyrean of its native power. The sensations that poured in upon me are indescribable. I seemed to live more keenly, to reach to a higher joy, and sip the goblet of a subtler thought than ever it had been my lot to do before. I was another and most glorified self, and all the avenues of the possible were for a space laid open to the footsteps of the real. Then suddenly, whilst I rejoiced in this splendid vigor of a new-found self, from far, far away there came a dreadful muttering noise, that grew and grew to a crash and a roar, which combined in itself all that is terrible and yet splendid in the possibilities of sound. Nearer it came, and nearer yet, till it was close upon us, rolling down like all the thunder wheels of heaven behind the horses of the lightning. On it came, and with it came the glorious blinding cloud of many-colored light, and stood before us for a space, turning, as it seemed to us, slowly round and round, and then, accompanied by its attendant pomp of sound, passed away I know not whither. So astonishing was the wondrous sight that one and all of us, save she, who stood up and stretched her hands towards the fire, sank down before it, and hid our faces in the sand. When it was gone, Aisha spoke. Now, Callicrates, she said, the mighty moment is at hand. When the great flame comes again thou must stand in it. First throw aside thy garments, for it will burn them, though thee it will not hurt. Thou must stand in the flame while thy senses will endure, and when it embraces thee suck the fire down into thy very heart, and let it leap and play around thy every part, so that thou lose no moiety of its virtue. Hearest thou me, Callicrates? I hear thee, Aisha, answered Leo, but of a truth, I am no coward, but I doubt me of that raging flame. How know I that it will not utterly destroy me, so that I lose myself and lose thee also? Nevertheless will I do it, he added. Aisha thought for a minute, and then said, It is not wonderful that thou shouldst doubt. Tell me, Callicrates, if thou sayest me stand in the flame and come forth unharmed, wilt thou enter also? Yes, he answered. I will enter even if it slay me. I have said that I will enter now. And that will I also, I cried. What, my Holly? She laughed aloud. Methought that thou wouldst not of length of days. Why, how is this? Nay, I know not, I answered. But there is that in my heart that calleth me to taste of the flame and live. It is well, she said. Thou art not altogether lost in folly. See now, I will for the second time bathe me in this living bath. Fain would I add to my beauty and my length of days if that be possible. If it be not possible, at the least it cannot harm me. Also, she continued, after a momentary pause, is there another and a deeper cause why I would once again dip me in the flame? When first I tasted of its virtue full was my heart of passion and of hatred of that Egyptian Aminartis, and therefore, despite my strivings to be rid thereof, have passion and hatred been stamped upon my soul from that sad hour to this. But now it is otherwise. Now is my mood a happy mood, and filled am I with the purest part of thought, and so would I ever be. Therefore, Callicrates, will I once more wash and make me pure and clean, and yet more fit for thee. Therefore also, when thou dost in turn stand in the fire, empty all thy heart of evil, and let soft contentment hold the balance of thy mind. Shake loose thy spirit's wings, and take thy stand upon the utter verge of holy contemplation. I dream upon thy mother's kiss, and turn thee towards the vision of the highest good that hath ever swept on silver wings across the silence of thy dreams. For from the germ of what thou art in that dread moment shall grow the fruit of what thou shalt be for all unreckoned time. Now prepare thee, prepare, even as though thy last hour were at hand, and thou wast to cross to the land of shadows, and not through the gates of glory into the realms of life made beautiful. Prepare, I say. 26. What we saw. Then came a few moments' pause, during which Aisha seemed to be gathering up her strength for the fiery trial, while we clung to each other, and waited in utter silence. At last, from far, far away, came the first murmur of sound, that grew and grew till it began to crash and bellow in the distance. As she heard it, Aisha swiftly threw off her gauzy wrapping, loosened the golden snake from her kirtle, and then, shaking her lovely hair about her like a garment, beneath its cover slipped the kirtle off and replaced the snaky belt around her, and outside the masses of her falling hair. There she stood before us as Eve might have stood before Adam, clad in nothing but her abundant locks, held round her by the golden band. And no words of mine can tell how sweet she looked, and yet how divine. Nearer and nearer came the thunder wheels of fire, and as they came she pushed one ivory arm through the dark masses of her hair, and flung it round Leo's neck. "Oh, my love," she murmured. "Wilt thou ever know how I have loved thee?" And she kissed him on the forehead, and then went and stood in the pathway of the flame of life. There was, I remember, to my mind something very touching about her words, and that embrace upon the forehead. It was like a mother's kiss, and seemed to convey a benediction with it. On came the crashing, rolling noise, and the sound of it was as the sound of a forest being swept flat by a mighty wind, and then tossed up like so much grass, and thundered down a mountainside. Nearer and nearer it came. Now flashes of light, forerunners of the revolving pillar of flame, were passing like arrows through the rosy air. And now the edge of the pillar itself appeared. Aisha turned towards it, and stretched out her arms to greet it. On it came very slowly, and lapped her round with flame. I saw the fire run up her form. I saw her lift it with both hands as though it were water, and pour it over her head. I even saw her open her mouth and draw it down into her lungs, and a dread and wonderful sight it was. Then she paused and stretched out her arms, and stood there quite still, with a heavenly smile upon her face, as though she were the very spirit of the flame. The mysterious fire played up and down her dark and rolling locks, twining and twisting itself through and around them like threads of golden lace. It gleamed upon her ivory breast and shoulder, from which the hair had slipped aside. It slid along her pillared throat and delicate features, and seemed to find a home in the glorious eyes that shone and shone, more brightly even than the spiritual essence. Oh, how beautiful she looked there in the flame! No angel out of heaven could have worn a greater loveliness. Even now my heart faints before the recollection of it, as she stood and smiled at our odd faces, and I would give half my remaining time upon this earth to see her once like that again. But suddenly, more suddenly than I can describe, a kind of change came over her face, a change which I could not define or explain, but nonetheless a change. The smile vanished, and in its place there came a dry, hard look. The rounded face seemed to grow pinched, as though some great anxiety were leaving its impress upon it. The glorious eyes, too, lost their light, and as I thought, the form its perfect shape and erectness. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that I was the victim of some hallucination, or that the refraction from the intense light produced an optical delusion. And as I did so, the flaming pillar slowly twisted and thundered off whithersoever it passes to in the bowels of the great earth, leaving Aisha standing where it had been. As soon as it was gone, she stepped forward to Leo's side. It seemed to me that there was no spring in her step, and stretched out her hand to lay it on his shoulder. I gazed at her arm. Where was its wonderful roundness and beauty? It was getting thin and angular. And her face! By heaven! Her face was growing old before my eyes. I suppose that Leo saw it also. Certainly he recoiled a step or two. "What is it, my Callicrates?" she said, and her voice, what was the matter with those deep and thrilling notes? They were quite high and cracked. "Why, what is it? What is it?" she said confusedly. I feel dazed. Surely the quality of the fire hath not altered. Can the principle of life alter? Tell me, Callicrates, is there aught wrong with my eyes? I see not clear. And she put her hand to her head and touched her hair, and oh horror of horrors! It all fell upon the floor. Oh look! 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 Shrieked Job, in a shrill falsetto of terror, his eyes nearly dropping out of his head, and foam upon his lips. Look, look, look! She's shriveling up. She's turning into a monkey. And down he fell upon the ground, foaming and gnashing in a fit. True enough. I faint even as I write it in the living presence of that terrible recollection. She was shriveling up. The golden snake that had encircled her gracious form slipped over her hips and to the ground. Smaller and smaller she grew. Her skin changed color, and in place of the perfect whiteness of its luster it turned dirty brown and yellow, like an old piece of withered parchment. She felt at her head. The delicate hand was nothing but a claw now, a human talon like that of a badly preserved Egyptian mummy. And then she seemed to realize what kind of change was passing over her. And she shrieked. Ah, she shrieked. She rolled upon the floor and shrieked. Smaller she grew, and smaller yet, till she was no larger than a monkey. Now the skin was puckered into a million wrinkles, and on the shapeless face was the stamp of unutterable age. I never saw anything like it. Nobody ever saw anything like the frightful age that was graven on that fearful countenance, no bigger now than that of a 2 months' child, though the skull remained the same size, or nearly so, and let all men pray they never may, if they wish to keep their reason. At last she lay still, or only feebly moving. She who but 2 minutes before had gazed upon us the loveliest, noblest, most splendid woman the world has ever seen. She lay still before us, near the masses of her own dark hair, no larger than a big monkey, and hideous. Ah, too hideous for words. And yet, think of this, at that very moment I thought of it, it was the same woman. She was dying, we saw it, and thank God, for while she lived she could feel, and what must she have felt? She raised herself upon her bony hands, and blindly gazed around her, swaying her head slowly from side to side as a tortoise does. She could not see, for her whitish eyes were covered with a horny film. Oh, the horrible pathos of the sight! But she could still speak. Callicrates, she said in husky, trembling notes. Forget me not, Callicrates. Have pity on my shame. I shall come again, and shall once more be beautiful, I swear it. It is true. Oh, H. And she fell upon her face and was still. On the very spot where more than 20 centuries before she had slain Callicrates the priest, she herself fell down and died. I know not how long we remained thus. Many hours, I suppose. When at last I opened my eyes, the other two were still outstretched upon the floor. The rosy light yet beamed like a celestial dawn, and the thunder wheels of the spirit of life yet rolled upon their accustomed track, for as I awoke the great pillar was passing away. There too lay the hideous little monkey frame, covered with crinkled yellow parchment, that once had been the glorious she. Alas! It was no hideous dream. It was an awful and unparalleled fact. What had happened to bring this shocking change about? Had the nature of the life-giving fire changed? Did it, perhaps, from time to time send forth an essence of death instead of an essence of life? Or was it that the frame once charged with its marvelous virtue could bear no more, so that were the process repeated, it mattered not at what lapse of time? The two impregnations neutralized each other, and left the body on which they acted as it was before it ever came into contact with the very essence of life? This, and this alone, would account for the sudden and terrible aging of Aisha, as the whole length of her 2,000 years took effect upon her. I have not the slightest doubt myself, but that the frame now lying before me was just what the frame of a woman would be if by any extraordinary means life could be preserved in her till she at length died at the age of 22 centuries. But who can tell what had happened? There was the fact. Often since that awful hour I have reflected that it requires no great imagination to see the finger of Providence in the matter. Aisha locked up in her living tomb waiting from age to age for the coming of her lover worked but a small change in the order of the world. But Aisha, strong and happy in her love, clothed in immortal youth and goddess beauty, and the wisdom of the centuries, would have revolutionized society, and even perchance have changed the destiny of mankind. Thus she opposed herself against the eternal law, and strong though she was, by it was swept back to nothingness. swept back with shame and hideous mockery. For some minutes I lay faintly turning these terrors over in my mind, while my physical strength came back to me, which it quickly did in that buoyant atmosphere. Then I bethought me of the others and staggered to my feet, to see if I could arouse them. But first I took up Aisha's kirtle and the gauzy scarf with which she had been wont to hide her dazzling loveliness from the eyes of men, and averting my head so that I might not look upon it, covered up that dreadful relic of the glorious dead, that shocking epitome of human beauty and human life. I did this hurriedly, fearing lest Leo should recover, and see it again. Then, stepping over the perfumed masses of dark hair that lay upon the sand, I stooped down by Job, who was lying upon his face, and turned him over. As I did so his arm fell back in a way that I did not like, and which sent a chill through me, and I glanced sharply at him. One look was enough. Our old and faithful servant was dead. His nerves, already shattered by all he had seen and undergone, had utterly broken down beneath this last dire sight, and he had died of terror, or in a fit brought on by terror. I had only to look at his face to see it. It was another blow, but perhaps it may help people to understand how overwhelmingly awful was the experience through which we had passed. We did not feel it much at the time. It seemed quite natural that the poor fellow should be dead. When Leo came to himself, which he did with a groan and trembling of the limbs about 10 minutes afterwards, and I told him that Job was dead, he merely said, "Oh." And mind you, this was from no heartlessness, for he and Job were much attached to each other, and he often talks of him now with the deepest regret and affection. It was only that his nerves would bear no more. A harp can give out but a certain quantity of sound, however heavily it is smitten. Well, I set myself to recovering Leo, who, to my infinite relief, I found was not dead, but only fainting, and in the end I succeeded, as I have said, and he sat up. And then I saw another dreadful thing. When we entered that awful place his curling hair had been of the ruddiest gold. Now it was turning gray, and by the time we reached the outer air it was snow white. Besides, he looked 20 years older. "What is to be done, old fellow?" he said in a hollow, dead sort of voice, when his mind had cleared a little, and a recollection of what had happened forced itself upon it. "Try and get out, I suppose," I answered. "That is, unless you would like to go in there," and I pointed to the column of fire that was once more rolling by. "I would go in if I were sure that it would kill me," he said with a little laugh. "It was my cursed hesitation that did this. If I had not been doubtful, she might never have tried to show me the road. But I am not sure. The fire might have the opposite effect upon me. It might make me immortal, and old fellow, I have not the patience to wait a couple of 1,000 years for her to come back again as she did for me. I had rather die when my hour comes, and I should fancy that it isn't far off either, and go my ways to look for her. Do you go in if you like?" But I merely shook my head. My excitement was as dead as ditch water, and my distaste for the prolongation of my mortal span had come back upon me more strongly than ever. Besides, we neither of us knew what the effects of the fire might be. The result upon she had not been of an encouraging nature, and of the exact causes that produced that result we were, of course, ignorant. "Well, my boy," I said, "we cannot stop here till we go the way of those two," and I pointed to the little heap under the white garment and to the stiffening corpse of poor Job. "If we are going we had better go. But by the way, I expect that the lamps have burnt out." And I took one up and looked at it, and sure enough it had. "There is some more oil in the vase," said Leo indifferently. "If it is not broken at least." I examined the vessel in question. It was intact. With a trembling hand I filled the lamps. Luckily there was still some of the linen wick unburnt. Then I lit them with one of our wax matches. While I did so we heard the pillar of fire approaching once more as it went on its never-ending journey, if indeed, it was the same pillar that passed and repassed in a circle. "Let's see it come once more," said Leo. "We shall never look upon its like again in this world." It seemed a bit of idle curiosity, but somehow I shared it, and so we waited till, turning slowly round upon its own axis, it had flamed and thundered by, and I remember wondering for how many thousands of years this same phenomenon had been taking place in the bowels of the earth, and for how many more thousands it would continue to take place. I wondered also if any mortal eyes would ever again mark its passage, or any mortal ears be thrilled and fascinated by the swelling volume of its majestic sound. I do not think that they will. I believe that we are the last human beings who will ever see that unearthly sight. Presently it had gone, and we too turned to go. But before we did so, we each took Job's cold hand in ours and shook it. It was a rather ghastly ceremony, but it was the only means in our power of showing our respect to the faithful dead, and of celebrating his obsequies. The heap beneath the white garment we did not uncover. We had no wish to look upon that terrible sight again. But we went to the pile of rippling hair that had fallen from her in the agony of that hideous change which was worse than 1,000 natural deaths. And each of us drew from it a shining lock. And these locks we still have, the sole memento that is left to us of Aisha as we knew her in the fullness of her grace and glory. Leo pressed the perfumed hair to his lips. She called to me not to forget her, he said hoarsely, and swore that we should meet again. By heaven, I never will forget her. Here I swear that if we live to get out of this, I will not for all my days have anything to say to another living woman, and that wherever I go I will wait for her as faithfully as she waited for me. Yes, I thought to myself, if she comes back as beautiful as we knew her. But supposing she came back like that? One, what a terrifying reflection it is, by the way, that nearly all our deep love for women who are not our kindred depends, at any rate, in the first instance, upon their personal appearance. If we lost them, and found them again dreadful to look on, though otherwise they were the very same, should we still love them? Well, and then we went, and left those two in the presence of the very well and spring of life, but gathered to the cold company of death. How lonely they looked as they lay there, and how ill-assorted! That little heap had been for 2,000 years the wisest, loveliest, proudest creature. I can hardly call her woman, in the whole universe. She had been wicked, too, in her way, but alas! Such is the frailty of the human heart. Her wickedness had not detracted from her charm. Indeed, I am by no means certain that it did not add to it. It was after all of a grand order. There was nothing mean or small about Aisha. And poor Job too. His presentiment had come true, and there was an end of him. Well, he has a strange burial place. No Norfolk hind ever had a stranger, or ever will. And it is something to lie in the same sepulchre as the poor remains of the imperial she. We looked our last upon them and the indescribable rosy glow in which they lay, and then with hearts far too heavy for words we left them, and crept thence broken down men. So broken down that we even renounced the chance of practically immortal life, because all that made life valuable had gone from us. And we knew even then that to prolong our days indefinitely would only be to prolong our sufferings. For we felt, yes, both of us, that having once looked Aisha in the eyes, we could not forget her for ever and ever while memory and identity remained. We both loved her now and for all time. She was stamped and carven on our hearts, and no other woman or interest could ever raise that splendid die. And there lies the sting. I had and have no right to think thus of her. As she told me, I was not to her, and never shall be through the unfathomed depths of time, unless indeed conditions alter, and a day comes at last when two men may love one woman, and all three be happy in the fact. It is the only hope of my broken-heartedness, and a rather faint one. Beyond it I have nothing. I have paid down this heavy price, all that I am worth here and hereafter, and that is my sole reward. With Leo it is different, and often I bitterly envy him his happy lot, for if she was right, and her wisdom and knowledge did not fail her at the last, which, arguing from the precedent of her own case, I think most unlikely, he has some future to look forward to. But I have none, and yet, mark the folly and the weakness of the human heart, and let him who is wise learn wisdom from it. Yet I would not have it otherwise. I mean that I am content to give what I have given and must always give, and take in payment those crumbs that fall from my mistress's table, the memory of a few kind words, the hope one day in the far undreamed future of a sweet smile or two of recognition, a little gentle friendship, and a little show of thanks for my devotion to her. And Leo, if that does not constitute true love, I do not know what does. And all I have to say is that it is a very bad state of affairs for a man on the wrong side of middle age to fall into. 27. We leap. We passed through the caves without trouble, but when we came to the slope of the inverted cone, two difficulties stared us in the face. The first of these was the laborious nature of the ascent, and the next the extreme difficulty of finding our way. Indeed, Had it not been for the mental notes that I had fortunately taken of the shape of various rocks, I am sure that we never should have managed it at all, but have wandered about in the dreadful womb of the volcano, for I suppose it must once have been something of the sort, until we died of exhaustion and despair. As it was, we went wrong several times, and once nearly fell into a huge crack or crevasse. It was terrible work creeping about in the dense gloom and awful stillness from boulder to boulder, and examining it by the feeble light of the lamps to see if I could recognize its shape. We rarely spoke, our hearts were too heavy for speech, we simply stumbled about, falling sometimes and cutting ourselves, in a rather dogged sort of way. The fact was that our spirits were utterly crushed, and we did not greatly care what happened to us. Only we felt bound to try and save our lives whilst we could, and indeed a natural instinct prompted us to it. So for some 3 or 4 hours, I should think, I cannot tell exactly how long, for we had no watch left that would go, we blundered on. During the last 2 hours we were completely lost, and I began to fear that we had got into the funnel of some subsidiary cone, when at last I suddenly recognized a very large rock which we had passed in descending but a little way from the top. It is a marvel that I should have recognized it, and indeed we had already passed it going at right angles to the proper path, when something about it struck me, and I turned back and examined it in an idle sort of way, and as it happened, this proved our salvation. After this we gained the rocky natural stair without much further trouble, and in due course found ourselves back in the little chamber where the benighted Nut had lived and died. But now a fresh terror stared us in the face. It will be remembered that owing to Job's fear and awkwardness, the plank upon which we had crossed from the huge spur to the rocking stone had been whirled off into the tremendous gulf below. How were we to cross without the plank? There was only one answer. We must try and jump it, or else stop there till we starved. The distance in itself was not so very great, between 11 and 12 feet I should think, and I have seen Leo jump over 20 when he was a young fellow at college. But then think of the conditions. 2 weary, worn-out men, one of them on the wrong side of 40, a rocking stone to take off from, a trembling point of rock some few feet across to land upon, and a bottomless gulf to be cleared in a raging gale. It was bad enough, God knows, but when I pointed out these things to Leo, he put the whole matter in a nutshell, by replying that, merciless as the choice was, we must choose between the certainty of a lingering death in the chamber, and the risk of a swift one in the air. Of course, there was no arguing against this, but one thing was clear, we could not attempt that leap in the dark. The only thing to do was to wait for the ray of light which pierced through the gulf at sunset. How near to or how far from sunset we might be, neither of us had the faintest notion. All we did know was, that when at last the light came it would not endure more than a couple of minutes at the outside, so that we must be prepared to meet it. Accordingly, we made up our minds to creep on to the top of the rocking stone and lie there in readiness. We were the more easily reconciled to this course by the fact that our lamps were once more nearly exhausted. Indeed, one had gone out bodily, and the other was jumping up and down as the flame of a lamp does when the oil is done. So by the aid of its dying light, we hastened to crawl out of the little chamber, and clamber up the side of the great stone. As we did so the light went out. The difference in our position was a sufficiently remarkable one. Below, in the little chamber, we had only heard the roaring of the gale overhead. Here, lying on our faces on the swinging stone, we were exposed to its full force and fury, as the great draught drew first from this direction and then from that, howling against the mighty precipice and through the rocky cliffs like 10,000 despairing souls. We lay there hour after hour in terror and misery of mind so deep that I will not attempt to describe it, and listen to the wild storm voices of that Tartarus, as set to the deep undertone of the spur opposite against which the wind hummed like some awful harp. They called to each other from precipice to precipice. No nightmare dreamed by man, no wild invention of the romancer, can ever equal the living horror of that place, and the weird crying of those voices of the night, as we clung like shipwrecked mariners to a raft, and tossed on the black, unfathomed wilderness of air. Fortunately the temperature was not a low one. Indeed, the wind was warm, or we should have perished. So we clung and listened, and while we were stretched out upon the rock a thing happened which was so curious and suggestive in itself, though doubtless a mere coincidence, that, if anything, it added to, rather than deducted from, the burden on our nerves. It will be remembered that when Aisha was standing on the spur, before we crossed to the stone, the wind tore her cloak from her, and whirled it away into the darkness of the gulf. We could not see whither. Well, I hardly like to tell the story. It is so strange. As we lay there upon the rocking stone, this very cloak came floating out of the black space, like a memory from the dead, and fell on Leo, so that it covered him nearly from head to foot. We could not at first make out what it was, but soon discovered by its feel, and then poor Leo, for the first time, gave way, and I heard him sobbing there upon the stone. No doubt the cloak had been caught upon some pinnacle of the cliff, and was thence blown hither by a chance gust, but still, it was a most curious and touching incident. Shortly after this, suddenly, without the slightest previous warning, the great red knife of light came stabbing the darkness through and through, struck the swaying stone on which we were, and rested its sharp point upon the spur opposite. "Now for it," said Leo. "Now or never." We rose and stretched ourselves, and looked at the cloud wreaths stained the color of blood by that red ray as they tore through the sickening depths beneath, and then at the empty space between the swaying stone and the quivering rock, and in our hearts, despaired and prepared for death. Surely we could not clear it, desperate though we were. "Who is to go first?" said I. "Do you, old fellow," answered Leo. "I will sit upon the other side of the stone to steady it. You must take as much run as you can, and jump high, and God have mercy on us, say I." I acquiesced with a nod, and then I did a thing I had never done since Leo was a little boy. I turned and put my arm round him, and kissed him on the forehead. It sounds rather French, but as a fact I was taking my last farewell of a man whom I could not have loved more if he had been my own son twice over. "Goodbye, my boy," I said. "I hope that we shall meet again, wherever it is that we go to." The fact was I did not expect to live another 2 minutes. Next I retreated to the far side of the rock, and waited till one of the chopping gusts of wind got behind me, and then I ran the length of the huge stone, some 34 feet, and sprang wildly out into the dizzy air. Oh, the sickening terrors that I felt as I launched myself at that little point of rock, and the horrible sense of despair that shot through my brain as I realized that I had jumped short. But so it was, my feet never touched the point, they went down into space, only my hands and body came in contact with it. I gripped at it with a yell, but one hand slipped, and I swung right round, holding by the other, so that I faced the stone from which I had sprung. Wildly I stretched up with my left hand, and this time managed to grasp a knob of rock, and there I hung in the fierce red light, with thousands of feet of empty air beneath me. My hands were holding to either side of the under part of the spur, so that its point was touching my head. Therefore, even if I could have found the strength, I could not pull myself up. The most that I could do would be to hang for about a minute, and then drop down into the bottomless pit. If any man can imagine a more hideous position, let him speak. All I know is that the torture of that half-minute nearly turned my brain. I heard Leo give a cry, and then suddenly saw him in mid-air springing up and out like a chamois. It was a splendid leap that he took under the influence of his terror and despair, clearing the horrible gulf as if it were nothing, and landing well on to the rocky point, he threw himself upon his face, to prevent his pitching off into the depths. I felt the spur above me shake beneath the shock of his impact, and as it did so I saw the huge rocking stone, that had been violently depressed by him as he sprang, fly back when relieved of his weight till, for the first time during all these centuries, it got beyond its balance, fell with a most awful crash right into the rocky chamber which had once served the philosopher Nut for a hermitage, and I have no doubt, forever sealed the passage that leads to the place of life with some hundreds of tons of rock. All this happened in a second, and curiously enough, notwithstanding my terrible position, I noted it involuntarily, as it were. I even remember thinking that no human being would go down that dread path again. Next instant I felt Leo seize me by the right wrist with both hands. By lying flat on the point of rock, he could just reach me. "You must let go and swing yourself clear," he said in a calm and collected voice. "And then I will try and pull you up, or we will both go together. Are you ready?" By way of answer I let go, first with my left hand and then with the right, and as a consequence swayed out clear of the overshadowing rock, my weight hanging upon Leo's arms. It was a dreadful moment. He was a very powerful man, I knew, but would his strength be equal to lifting me up till I could get a hold on the top of the spur, when owing to his position he had so little purchase? For a few seconds I swung to and fro, while he gathered himself for the effort, and then I heard his sinews cracking above me, and felt myself lifted up as though I were a little child, till I got my left arm round the rock, and my chest was resting on it. The rest was easy. In 2 or 3 more seconds I was up, and we were lying panting side by side, trembling like leaves, and with the cold perspiration of terror pouring from our skins. And then, as before, the light went out like a lamp. For some half-hour we lay thus without speaking a word, and then at length began to creep along the great spur as best we might in the dense gloom. As we drew towards the face of the cliff, however, from which the spur sprang out like a spike from a wall, the light increased, though only a very little, for it was night overhead. After that the gusts of wind decreased, and we got along rather better, and at last reached the mouth of the first cave or tunnel. But now a fresh trouble stared us in the face. Our oil was gone, and the lamps were, no doubt, crushed to powder beneath the fallen rocking stone. We were even without a drop of water to stay our thirst, for we had drunk the last in the chamber of Nut. How were we to see to make our way through this last boulder-strewn tunnel? Clearly all that we could do was to trust to our sense of feeling, and attempt the passage in the dark. So in we crept, fearing that if we delayed to do so our exhaustion would overcome us, and we should probably lie down and die where we were. Oh, the horrors of that last tunnel! The place was strewn with rocks, and we fell over them, and knocked ourselves up against them till we were bleeding from a score of wounds. Our only guide was the side of the cavern, which we kept touching, and so bewildered did we grow in the darkness that we were several times seized with the terrifying thought that we had turned, and were traveling the wrong way. On we went feebly and still more feebly for hour after hour, stopping every few minutes to rest, for our strength was spent. Once we fell asleep, and I think, must have slept for some hours, for when we woke, our limbs were quite stiff, and the blood from our blows and scratches had caked, and was hard and dry upon our skin. Then we dragged ourselves on again, till at last, when despair was entering into our hearts, we once more saw the light of day, and found ourselves outside the tunnel in the rocky fold on the outer surface of the cliff that, it will be remembered, led into it. It was early morning. That we could tell by the feel of the sweet air and the look of the blessed sky, which we had never hoped to see again. It was so near as we knew, an hour after sunset when we entered the tunnel, so it followed that it had taken us the entire night to crawl through that dreadful place. One more effort, Leo, I gasped, and we shall reach the slope where Bilali is if he hasn't gone. Come, don't give way. For he had cast himself upon his face. He rose, and leaning on each other, we got down that 50 feet or so of cliff. Somehow, I have not the least notion how. I only remember that we found ourselves lying in a heap at the bottom, and then once more began to drag ourselves along on our hands and knees towards the grove where she had told Bilali to wait her re-arrival, for we could not walk another foot. We had not gone 50 yards in this fashion when suddenly one of the mutes emerged from the trees on our left, through which, I presume, he had been taking a morning stroll, and came running up to see what sort of strange animals we were. He stared, and then held up his hands in horror, and nearly fell to the ground. Next he started off as hard as he could for the grove some 200 yards away. No wonder that he was horrified at our appearance, for we must have been a shocking sight. To begin, Leo, with his golden curls turned to snowy white, his clothes nearly rent from his body, his worn face and his hands a mass of bruises, cuts and blood-encrusted filth, was a sufficiently alarming spectacle, as he painfully dragged himself along the ground, and I have no doubt that I was little better to look on. I know that 2 days afterwards when I inspected my face in some water, I scarcely recognized myself. I have never been famous for beauty, but there was something beside ugliness stamped upon my features that I have never got rid of until this day, something resembling that wild look with which a startled person wakes from deep sleep more than anything else that I can think of. And really it is not to be wondered at. What I do wonder at is that we escaped at all with our reason. Presently, to my intense relief, I saw old Bilali hurrying towards us, and even then I could scarcely help smiling at the expression of consternation on his dignified countenance. "Oh, my baboon! My baboon!" he cried. "My dear son, is it indeed thee and the lion? Why, his mane that was ripe as corn is white like the snow. Whence come ye? And where is the pig, and where to she who must be obeyed?" "Dead, both dead," I answered, "but ask no questions. Help us and give us food and water, or we too shall die before thine eyes. Sayest thou not that our tongues are black for want of water? How then can we talk? Dead, he gasped. Impossible. She who never dies dead, how can it be? And then perceiving, I think, that his face was being watched by the mutes who had come running up, he checked himself, and motioned to them to carry us to the camp, which they did. Fortunately, when we arrived, some broth was boiling on the fire, and with this Bilali fed us, for we were too weak to feed ourselves, thereby I firmly believe saving us from death by exhaustion. Then he bade the mutes wash the blood and grime from us with wet cloths, and after that we were laid down upon piles of aromatic grass, and instantly fell into the dead sleep of absolute exhaustion of mind and body. 28. Over the mountain. The next thing I recollect is a feeling of the most dreadful stiffness, and a sort of vague idea passing through my half-awakened brain that I was a carpet that had just been beaten. I opened my eyes, and the first thing they fell on was the venerable countenance of our old friend Bilali, who was seated by the side of the improvised bed upon which I was sleeping, and thoughtfully stroking his long beard. The sight of him at once brought back to my mind a recollection of all that we had recently passed through, which was accentuated by the vision of poor Leo lying opposite to me, his face knocked almost to a jelly, and his beautiful crowd of curls turned from yellow to white. And I shut my eyes again and groaned. Curiously enough, Leo's hair has lately been to some extent regaining its color, that is to say, it is now a yellowish gray, and I am not without hopes that it will in time come quite right. L.H.H. Thou hast slept long, my baboon, said old Bilali. How long, my father? I asked. A round of the sun and a round of the moon. A day and a night hast thou slept, and the lion also. See, he sleepeth yet. Blessed is sleep, I answered, for it swallows up recollection. Tell me, he said, what hath befallen you, and what is this strange story of the death of her who dieth not? Bethink thee, my son. If this be true, then is thy danger and the danger of the lion very great. Nay, almost is the pot red wherewith ye shall be potted, and the stomachs of those who shall eat ye are already hungry for the feast. Knowest thou not that these Haggard, my children, these dwellers in the caves, hate ye? They hate ye as strangers. They hate ye more because of their brethren whom she put to the torment for your sake. Assuredly, if once they learn that there is naught to fear from Haya, from the terrible one who must be obeyed, they will slay ye by the pot. But let me hear thy tale, my poor baboon. Thus adjured, I set to work and told him, not everything indeed, for I did not think it desirable to do so, but sufficient for my purpose, which was to make him understand that she was really no more, having fallen into some fire, and as I put it, for the real thing would have been incomprehensible to him, been burnt up. I also told him some of the horrors we had undergone in effecting our escape, and these produced a great impression on him. But I clearly saw that he did not believe in the report of Aisha's death. He believed indeed that we thought that she was dead, but his explanation was that it had suited her to disappear for a while. Once, he said, in his father's time, she had done so for 12 years, and there was a tradition in the country that many centuries back no one had seen her for a whole generation, when she suddenly reappeared, and destroyed a woman who had assumed the position of queen. I said nothing to this, but only shook my head sadly. Alas! I knew too well that Aisha would appear no more, or at any rate that Bilali would never see her again. And now, concluded Bilali, what wouldst thou do, my baboon? Nay, I said, I know not, my father. Can we not escape from this country? He shook his head. It is very difficult. By Kor ye cannot pass, for ye would be seen. And as soon as those fierce ones found that ye were alone, well. And he smiled significantly, and made a movement as though he were placing a hat on his head. But there is a way over the cliff whereof I once spake to thee, where they drive the cattle out to pasture. Then beyond the pastures are 3 days' journey through the marshes, and after that I know not, but I have heard that 7 days' journey from thence is a mighty river, which floweth to the black water. If ye could come thither, perchance ye might escape, but how can ye come thither? Bilali, I said, once thou knowest, I did save thy life. Now pay back the debt, my father, and save me mine and my friends the lions. It shall be a pleasant thing for thee to think of when thine hour comes, and something to set in the scale against the evil doing of thy days, if perchance thou hast done any evil. Also if thou be right, And if she doth but hide herself, surely when she comes again she shall reward thee. My son the baboon, answered the old man, think not that I have an ungrateful heart. Well do I remember how thou didst rescue me when those dogs stood by to see me drown. Measure for measure will I give thee, and if thou canst be saved, surely I will save thee. Listen, by dawn tomorrow be prepared, for litters shall be here to bear ye away across the mountains, and through the marshes beyond. This will I do, saying that it is the word of she that it be done, and he who obeyeth not the word of she food is he for the hyenas. Then when ye have crossed the marshes, ye must strike with your own hands, so that perchance, if good fortune go with you, ye may live to come to that black water whereof ye told me. And now see, the lion wakes, and ye must eat the food I have made ready for you. Leo's condition when once he was fairly aroused proved not to be so bad as might have been expected from his appearance, and we both of us managed to eat a hearty meal, which indeed we needed sadly enough. After this we limped down to the spring and bathed, and then came back and slept again till evening, when we once more ate enough for 5. Bilali was away all that day, no doubt making arrangements about litters and bearers, for we were awakened in the middle of the night by the arrival of a considerable number of men in the little camp. At dawn the old man himself appeared, and told us that he had by using she's dreadful name, though with some difficulty, succeeded in getting the necessary men and 2 guides to conduct us across the swamps, and that he urged us to start at once, at the same time announcing his intention of accompanying us so as to protect us against treachery. I was much touched by this act of kindness on the part of that wily old barbarian towards 2 utterly defenseless strangers. A 3, or in his case, for he would have to return 6, days' journey through those deadly swamps was no light undertaking for a man of his age, but he consented to do it cheerfully in order to promote our safety. It shows that even among those dreadful Haggard, who are certainly with their gloom and their devilish and ferocious rites by far the most terrible savages that I ever heard of, there are people with kindly hearts. Of course self-interest may have had something to do with it. He may have thought that she would suddenly reappear and demand an account of us at his hands, but still, allowing for all deductions, it was a great deal more than we could expect under the circumstances, and I can only say that I shall for as long as I live cherish a most affectionate remembrance of my nominal parent, old Bilali. Accordingly, after swallowing some food, we started in the litters feeling, so far as our bodies went, wonderfully like our old selves after our long rest and sleep. I must leave the condition of our minds to the imagination. Then came a terrible pull up the cliff. Sometimes the ascent was more natural, more often it was a zigzag roadway cut, no doubt, in the first instance by the old inhabitants of Kor. The Haggard say they drive their spare cattle over it once a year to pasture outside. All I know is that those cattle must be uncommonly active on their feet. Of course the litters were useless here, so we had to walk. By midday, however, we reached the great flat top of that mighty wall of rock, and grand enough the view was from it, with the plain of Kor, in the center of which we could clearly make out the pillared ruins of the Temple of Truth to the one side, and the boundless and melancholy marsh on the other. This wall of rock, which had no doubt once formed the lip of the crater, was about 1.5 miles thick, and still covered with clinker. Nothing grew there, and the only thing to relieve our eyes were occasional pools of rainwater, for rain had lately fallen, wherever there was a little hollow. Over the flat crest of this mighty rampart we went, and then came the descent which, if not so difficult a matter as the getting up, was still sufficiently breakneck, and took us till sunset. That night, however, we camped in safety upon the mighty slopes that rolled away to the marsh beneath. On the following morning, about 11 o'clock, began our dreary journey across those awful seas of swamps which I have already described. For 3 whole days, through stench and mire, and the all-prevailing flavor of fear, did our bearers struggle along, till at length we came to open rolling ground quite uncultivated, and mostly treeless, but covered with game of all sorts, which lies beyond that most desolate, and without guides utterly impracticable, district. And here on the following morning we bade farewell, not without some regret, to old Bilali, who stroked his white beard and solemnly blessed us. Farewell, my son the baboon, he said, and farewell to thee too, O lion. I can do no more to help you. But if ever ye come to your country, be advised, and venture no more into lands that ye know not, lest ye come back no more, but leave your white bones to mark the limit of your journeyings. Farewell once more. Often shall I think of you, nor wilt thou forget me, my baboon, for though thy face is ugly thy heart is true. And then he turned and went, and with him went the tall and sullen-looking bearers, and that was the last that we saw of the Amahagger. We watched them winding away with the empty litters like a procession bearing dead men from a battle, till the mists from the marsh gathered round them and hid them, and then, left utterly desolate in the vast wilderness, we turned and gazed round us and at each other. 3 weeks or so before 4 men had entered the marshes of Kor, and now 2 of us were dead, and the other 2 had gone through adventures and experiences so strange and terrible that death himself hath not a more fearful countenance. 3 weeks, and only 3 weeks. Truly time should be measured by events, and not by the lapse of hours. It seemed like 30 years since we saw the last of our whaleboat. We must strike out for the Zambesi, Leo, I said, but God knows if we shall ever get there. Leo nodded. He had become very silent of late, and we started with nothing but the clothes we stood in, a compass, our revolvers and express rifles, and about 200 rounds of ammunition, and so ended the history of our visit to the ancient ruins of mighty and imperial Kor. As for the adventures that subsequently befell us, strange and varied as they were, I have, after deliberation, determined not to record them here. In these pages I have only tried to give a short and clear account of an occurrence which I believe to be unprecedented, and this I have done, not with a view to immediate publication, but merely to put on paper while they are yet fresh in our memories the details of our journey and its result, which will, I believe, prove interesting to the world if ever we determine to make them public. This, as at present advised, we do not intend should be done during our joint lives. For the rest, it is of no public interest, resembling as it does the experience of more than one Central African traveler. Suffice it to say, that we did, after incredible hardships and privations, reach the Zambesi, which proved to be about 170 miles south of where Bilali left us. There we were for 6 months imprisoned by a savage tribe, who believed us to be supernatural beings, chiefly on account of Leo's youthful face and snow-white hair. From these people we ultimately escaped, and crossing the Zambesi, wandered off southwards, where, when on the point of starvation, we were sufficiently fortunate to fall in with a half-caste Portuguese elephant hunter, who had followed a troop of elephants farther inland than he had ever been before. This man treated us most hospitably, and ultimately through his assistance we, after innumerable sufferings and adventures, reached Delagoa Bay, more than 18 months from the time when we emerged from the marshes of Kor, and the very next day managed to catch one of the steamboats that run round the Cape to England. Our journey home was a prosperous one, and we set our foot on the quay at Southampton exactly 2 years from the date of our departure upon our wild and seemingly ridiculous quest. And I now write these last words with Leo leaning over my shoulder in my old room in my college, the very same into which some 22 years ago my poor friend Vinci came stumbling on the memorable night of his death, bearing the iron chest with him. And that is the end of this history so far as it concerns science and the outside world. What its end will be as regards Leo and myself is more than I can guess at. But we feel that is not reached yet. A story that began more than 2,000 years ago may stretch a long way into the dim and distant future. Is Leo really a reincarnation of the ancient Callicrates of whom the inscription tells? Or was Aisha deceived by some strange hereditary resemblance? The reader must form his own opinion on this, as on many other matters. I have mine, which is that she made no such mistake. Often I sit alone at night, staring with the eyes of the mind into the blackness of unborn time, and wondering in what shape and form the great drama will be finally developed, and where the scene of its next act will be laid. And when that final development ultimately occurs, as I have no doubt it must and will occur, in obedience to a fate that never swerves and a purpose that cannot be altered, what will be the part played therein by that beautiful Egyptian Amenartes, the princess of the royal race of the pharaohs, for the love of whom the priest Callicrates broke his vows to Isis, and pursued by the inexorable vengeance of the outraged goddess, fled down the coast of Libya to meet his doom at Kor?